Good evening and welcome to God Talk, a Black Millennials and Faith conversation. It is sponsored by the Center for the Study of African American Religious Life at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in association with the Pew Research Center. My name is Elise Preston and I'll be serving as your social media host this evening. Now, God Talk is a really special conversation, and although we're going to hear from a panel of experts, we also want to hear from you. So to join in on the discussion, use the hashtag God Talk, the hashtag Black Faith, and at the museum at NMAAHC. Before we begin with our first panel, we want to talk to a couple of millennials and Gen Xers. So joining me now is Mohamed. Good evening, Aaliyah. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
How old are you, and what is your faith tradition?
I'm 22 years old, and I follow the Islamic faith.
What are you hoping comes of this conversation tonight? What are you looking forward to most?
My biggest hope is to hear the discussion of why and how faith is so instrumental for Black youth and the success, especially in the time we live in right now.
Why? Why is that so important to you?
I think it's important because we have to know how faith fits in with us and how we fit in with faith and how much success we can have just on faith alone.
This is a conversation that's really personal to you. We were talking, you just graduated from college, and you said that you're leaning on your faith as you move forward to your next step.
Mm-hmm. Faith is something unseen, but it's something you expect from someone or something. And you don't always know where that's going to come from. But I think as strongly as you believe, and if you know it's there, then it's not impossible. Nothing is impossible to happen.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck to you in your future.
Thank you.
Up next, Cassandra Osei. Good evening, Cassandra. Thank you for coming in. How old are you, and what faith tradition do you practice?
I'm 26, and I practice traditional Ghanaian spirituality.
What is that for people who do not know?
For those who don't know, it's basically the respect of the earth, respect of ancestors, so ancestral reverence is key, and also respecting our elders.
What are you looking forward to this conversation tonight, and why do you think it is so important?
I'm looking forward to there being a conversation on unpacking the generational shift in our more so beliefs in religious differences, our spiritual differences, and also having an opportunity to learn from the panelists.
For you, why is that generational shift? Why is that a focus?
It's a focus because as we see the change in the climate in our generation today and as well as the world, we're especially coming in contact with different topics, different things that are important to us, and the way in which faith can interact with how we kind of move forward in the world.
For you, does this conversation end here tonight? How do we move the conversation forward?
I think we move the conversation forward by listening to the youth.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is the God Talk conversation, and if you want to take part, we want you to take part. Just use the hashtag God Talk and the hashtag Black Faith. Again, you can at the museum at NMAAHC. We have two panels coming up tonight. The first one is Faith in Context, where we're going to explore millennial participation or lack thereof in organized religion, and we're going to look at that through the numbers, through the data, and why that is so important. Again, we want to hear from you. Use the hashtag God Talk and the hashtag Black Faith, and also at the museum at NMAAHC. Now, the next people you're going to hear from tonight are Mrs. Jermira Tillman. She serves as the Global Director of the Harold Washington Center. We're also going to hear from Reverend Dr. Brad Braxton. He's the Supervisory Curator of the Center of African American Religious Life at the Smithsonian National Museum of the African American History and Culture. Again, a very special conversation. We want you to take part. We have a lot of panels and experts. We have an expert of panels. And then our second panel tonight is going to be Faith and Community. That's how we're going to explore how millennials practice faith through activism, community, work, and the arts. So the next person you're going to hear from tonight is Mrs. Jermira Tillman. She's the Global Director of the Harold Washington Center.
Welcome to the Harold Washington Cultural Center. We are proud to service over 25,000 youth with free to low to no cost arts programming. Here at the Harold Washington Cultural Center, we have a 1,000-seat theater, a full-service recording studio, a video editing lab. In our artistic area, which is we're so proud of, is the Mad Rhythms International Dance Institute right here. Here we house the Sammy Dyer School of Dance, as well as the Happiness Club in high definition. You can log on to the HaroldWashingtonCulturalCenter.com to find out more about what we do. Few housekeeping rules while we're here. Just want to make sure you refrain from walking in front of the stage or put your phones on silent, for we don't want to hear your Mahalia Jackson or your 2 Chainz tonight. We want to hear the conversation. A lot of great things are happening. We're fresh off of our 12-country tour. As the global director, it makes me proud to see people coming from all over the world and all throughout the country for this God Talk here, because Chicago is the center of it all. We look forward to seeing you at the theater.
Good evening. I am Brad Braxton, the director of the Center for the Study of African American Religious Life at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. I welcome you on behalf of the museum. We are delighted to collaborate with our partners, the Pew Research Center, the Harold Washington Cultural Center, and the extraordinary leaders who will talk with us this evening. We are especially grateful to the Lilly Endowment for its generous underwriting of this audacious undertaking. This evening, we will examine how socially engaged and social media savvy African American millennials are defining and redefining spirituality. We also will explore how they are hosting and cooperating with sacred energy to refashion a world that is more equitable, inclusive, and compassionate. This is the 4th of 7 episodes of this conversation series. We launched the conversation series in Los Angeles in August 2018. The second conversation was in Atlanta in January 2019. The third conversation occurred in Virginia Beach in April 2019. We are now in the middle of this conversation series, and by coming to Chicago, we are very much in the middle of the nation. For decades, Chicago has been a domicile of deliverance for Black people who sought to make a way out of no way. I was privileged to call this magnificent city home for 3 years when I taught not long ago at McCormick Theological Seminary. And when describing Chicago to people, I would often lovingly say, Chicago is Mississippi and Alabama north. In other words, the robust cultural practices in this city have deep anchorage in the migration patterns of Black people fleeing the harsh hatred of the Jim Crow South. While the Mississippi River flows south to empty its waters in the Gulf Coast, many Black people traveled in the opposite direction, up the Mississippi, and poured out their wisdom and wit on the shores of Lake Michigan. As Southern folkways traveled on Chicago urban highways, the blues got more better. Gospel music started mixing sacred lyrics with secular musical riffs, and civil rights activism and political strategy assumed sophisticated and courageous manifestations. Chicago has always been a place of innovation and risk-taking for Black people. While she came from the South, Ida B. Wells, that fearless journalist and humanitarian, made Chicago home. And from this city, she launched tireless campaigns against lynching, that heinous form of homegrown terrorism against African Americans. We also must mention that Chicago, in large measure, gave to the country and the world President Barack and First Lady Michelle Obama. For years leading up to their appearance on the global stage, their souls were nurtured at the Trinity United Church of Christ, one of the vibrant, courageous religious communities on this city's south side. This evening, as we engage in God Talk, we do so in an atmosphere replete with courage, innovation, and righteous risk-taking. Permit me now to introduce my colleague at the center, the visionary who orchestrated this innovative initiative and the moderator for the conversation, Teddy Reeves. Teddy is a native of North Carolina. He holds a bachelor's degree from Hampton University and a Master of Divinity degree from Preston Seminary. He is a Ph.D. candidate at Fordham University, an ordained clergy person, and a leading millennial voice. Teddy, lead us tonight in some righteous risk-taking.
Good evening. Oh, y'all got to do better than that. Good evening. Good evening. And welcome to God Talk. We are excited to be here at the Harold Washington Cultural Center here in Chicago for another conversation, another night of talking to Black millennials about faith. And I am so excited to be here. My name is Teddy Reeves, and I currently serve as the Curatorial Specialist of Religion at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Tonight's conversation, we have some amazing panelists for you, and I'm excited to jump right into the conversation. I do want to give you a few housekeeping rules for those of you who are watching us via stream. Make sure that you use God Talk, the hashtag God Talk, the hashtag Black Faith, and at the museum at NMAAHC, which you can find on your screen, at the museum with your questions and your comments to take part in the conversation. Also for you here live, we ask you to do the same thing. So let's jump right into the conversation. I want to introduce our panelists for this evening. At this conversation, Faith and Context, I know it's going to be an amazing conversation. So let's jump right in. I want to introduce our panelists, starting with Dr. Besheer Mohamed. Besheer is the senior researcher at the Pew Research Center. He specializes in studying religious minorities in the U.S. with a specific focus on Muslim Americans. Please welcome Dr. Besheer Mohamed. Jermira Trapp is our next panelist. She's a practitioner of Nichiren Buddhism with the Soka Gakkai International USA. She is an entrepreneur, Forex trader, and the voice of mental traps. Please welcome Jermira Trapp. Our next panelist, Nasik Yosef Asiel, is the new national ambassador of the Hebrew Israelite community in Dimona, Israel. He's also part owner of the family franchise restaurant, Original Soul Vegetarians. Please welcome Yosef Asiel. Our next panelist is Jade T. Perry. Jade is an integrative artist, tarot card slinger, play-based educator and facilitator, chronically ill and disabled femme babe, and the co-founder of the Mystic Soul Project. Please welcome Jade T. Perry. Our next panelist, Reverend Julian J. Quest Deshazier, is an Emmy Award-winning musician, MC, advocate, and speaker. He currently serves as the senior pastor of the University Church here in Chicago. Please welcome Reverend Julian J. Quest Deshazier. Our next panelist is Mecca Ali. She is the co-host of the acclaimed Identity Politics podcast, which features news stories and perspectives about race, gender, and Muslim life in America. Please welcome Mecca Ali. I want to introduce our DJ for the night, who will also be joining us for the conversation, DJ Rae Chardonnay. She is a DJ, arts administrator, events producer based in Chicago, dedicated to the encouraging of life of open mind and learning and expression. She is the founder of Black Utopia, a series of segmented programs intended to cultivate space for marginalized communities. Please give it up for DJ Rae Chardonnay. And last but not least, you saw her during the pre-show, and you'll see her throughout the night. I want to introduce our social media host for this evening, Elise Preston. Elise is the Live at Noon anchor and reports for Live at Daybreak each weekday morning and for her local news station, the local news station TMJ4 in Milwaukee. Elise is a proud graduate of Hampton University and a member of the National Association of Black Journalists and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Please welcome Elise Preston. All right, so let's jump into the conversation. That's what you came for, right? Yeah. Now, I'm a preacher. Now, y'all got to talk back to me. That's what you came for, right? Amen. All right, so I want to open the conversation up with Besheer. As we talked about, this first panel is really talking about the data. This is really how we ground our conversation. So the first question I have, and I'm going to start with Besheer, is what is the current state of millennial participation in organized faith traditions, and what does it mean?
So actually, I've got a couple of slides that might be helpful to make sense of this. Broadly speaking, what we see is that Black American millennials are at the intersection of two broad trends in American religious life. The one is that we know that young people in general, and millennials specifically, are less religious than older adults. And the other is that Black Americans, by and large, tend to be more religious than people of other races. And so you get to Black millennials, and they're at this intersection where they're less religious than their elders, but they're more religious than their peers. The next slide. And you can see this by a variety of measures. You can see this if you look at the frequency of prayer. You can see this if you look at how certain they are that God exists. You can look at this if you see just affiliation with a religious tradition. No matter how you measure it, you see the same pattern, that Black millennials are in the middle. We're on the one side, people that are more religious are older Blacks, people that are less religious, young people, their peers of other races. And if you go on to the next slide, another thing that you see is that this pattern is really a development of a broader pattern that we've seen across a variety of generations, where we see a declining share of people affiliated, of Blacks specifically, affiliated with Christianity broadly and with the Black church specifically. And so millennials are actually the first generation that the majority do not attend or have any affiliation with a historically Black denomination. Any previous generation, you look at Gen X, you look at baby boomers, you look at the silent generation, among Blacks, they all had a pretty strong tie to the Black church. But you don't see that among millennials. Rather, you see an increasing share that are affiliated with no religion. You also see an increasing share that are affiliated with non-Christian faiths, an increasing share that are Muslim, that are Buddhist, that are engaging in traditional African practices. So non-Christian faiths are finding a home, and a lot of other Black millennials are just leaving religion altogether.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I want to open it up to the panelists if you have something to say as well, or we can go to our next question.
I want to comment. Greetings, everyone. In addition to me being the ambassador for the Hebrew Israelite nation, I am also a student of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which I was trained in the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad at CROW, which is the Coalition for the Remembrance of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, stationed here in Chicago. And the reason I mention that is because we always think about Dr. Martin Luther King, and he was quoted telling Harry Belafonte that he had integrated his people into a burning building. And coming to this realization after meeting the messenger, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he had realized that the practices that he was taking our people into were ineffective. And why am I saying that? It's because we have a false contextualization of faith. We are under the false premise that faith or religion is separate from state because we have been contextualized by Europeans that think that they are. But in every context where Europeans govern their faith, whether it be Islam in the East, whether it be Christianity, whether it be Catholicism, in the Vatican, they are a form of governance. They have power, they have economics, they have commerce, they have trade, and they also have geographical locations where they govern themselves. What am I saying? At some point, we're going to have to make our faith produce something. In the scripture, we study that faith without works is what? It's dead. That means that if we, in our faith and our practice of faith, doesn't produce something tangible, it's dead, meaning that those who are not producing something tangible are dead as well. What am I saying? At some point, we have to understand and have a common definition of what faith is. We all have our perspectives, we all have our understandings, but when we get into a room together, all we do is talk at each other. We don't ever listen. We don't ever focus on the commonalities rather than the differences. And I think tonight will be such a special conversation because we have that ability today more than ever to look at all the differences that we think that we have and see that we all really want to just be free. We all just really want justice. We all just want peace and prosperity. That is that commonality which faith is the substance that creates something that can produce change. If you look at scripture, and I'll finish at this, if you look at scripture, whether it be Torah, New Gospel, or Quran, they're all talking about a people trying to come out of a circumstance, and change their situation. That's what we're more than ever, especially as being Black millennials. I know we tell ourselves things have changed, things are different, but the reality of it is pretty much the same. Just a different dress on it, just a different language that they speak, but the action is the same. We're still being hung. We're just getting shot down in the streets instead of by our noose. We're still being discriminated against. We're still being kept out of the most prestigious institutions. We're still financially inept in every aspect. We don't have any ownership of land. These are the things that we are actually worse than we were in the early 1900s, late 1800s, where we said we're progressing from. But our faith hasn't produced it. And that's why you see millennials are moving away from it because they said, hey, church hasn't changed my life or my circumstances. The mosque hasn't changed my life or circumstances. The temple hasn't changed my life or circumstances. Not that those faiths aren't real or tangible, it's just those who have been leading them falsely haven't produced the change. So here today, I implore everyone in this room and everyone on this panel, let's understand, faith without works is what? Yeah. That's it. We got to have some works to produce something.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing that. What echo and the beauty of this conversation on top of that is for everyone, faith without works may not be dead, right? And that's the beauty of this conversation because everyone brings a multiplicity of belief systems. And so I want to make sure that we continue to uplift that everyone sitting beside us and everyone listening may not share our faith tradition. So making sure that we're sensitive to that. And you shared this, so I want to get everyone else's perspective on this. At what point in your life's journey did you become aware of your spiritual identity? So you shared, Yosef, with us. I want to hear from the others. At what point in your life's journey did you become aware of your spiritual identity or have a spiritual awakening? And do you wish that spiritual consciousness had developed sooner or later in your life? Anyone, feel free to jump in.
I think I always had some kind of understanding of a spiritual identity. And I say this because I was raised actually in Philadelphia, and my family went to this little small storefront church, spiritualist church. And it was very diasporic in the fact that we went to church. When I say I went to the Black church, there were Black Americans, but I'm also talking about West Africans and Jamaicans. And so what worship looked like in this very small, tiny little space was very different and was very diverse. Moving from that space and moving from that place, I realized that there were seeds of African cosmological beliefs around wellness and wholeness and newness of life and death and resurrection and rebirth and all of these large archetypical themes that we were sharing regardless of the container that it was in. when I was a teenager, I was sharing this with Julian outside before this. When I was a teenager, then I was introduced to a little something called Reformed Calvinism. Those of you who know. But but what I learned in that space was that there is a socio-cultural reality to any of the theology that we do. And I learned that when we're living in our spiritual identities, that is a seed of something that can flourish and change and grow, and should be in some way bringing you back to what are the social cultural realities of the time. And so I think for me, I always knew that there was a spiritual identity there, but what the seed of me becoming a mystic, a churchy mystic, Buddhist, spiritualist, witchy, humanist, conglomeration of all of the things.
All of it.
I think that for me didn't come until I was older, until I had some experiences studying in different traditions and understanding that Black people talk about faith actually just as a part of our life. And Black people talk about ritual just as a part of our life. And so I think that there's a beautiful thing that the Black diaspora does in fostering spiritual identity. Now, where you find yourself in that conversation, I think is the interesting part. So do I wish that it would have come earlier or later? No, not really, because I think for me, all of those things were seeds of the divine, and it was up to me to listen and be really tuned in to, okay, what is sacred for me? What is sacred to me? And what is sacred in the communities that I serve, which are queer, trans, people of color, and Black people.
Thank you. Yeah.
I always had a seeking spirit where I attended church for many years. I went to a Catholic all-girls school. And as I started my career and just working, I realized that I was allowing my environment and people in my environment to affect me. And so the weekly gatherings at church wasn't enough for me. I needed something every day to practice. So that's when I became a practitioner of Nichiren Buddhism with the Soka Gakkai International. And we practice, you practice daily in your home. And they have 3 pillars: faith, practice, and study. So I study a lot and I keep myself grounded. I always keep some sort of book or publication on me when I feel that I don't have control anymore, but now I'm empowered to know that I am the protagonist of my life and I can change the trajectory at any time. And also, in the beginning, I did think that, I wish I would have become Buddhist, much sooner. But now I really realized that I needed to go through every single thing to become the person that I am. And I have so much appreciation for that.
Thank you for sharing.
Just to add, I think spirituality was always a way I understood myself in this place and in this country, because for my own personal narrative and personal history, my ancestors were taken from modern day Senegal and may very well have been Muslim. And so I grew up with the understanding that us returning to Islam may have been an answer to an ancestor's prayer. And so spirituality was very interwoven into my understanding of who I am, how I got to this place, and how I even exist right now. That being said, I do think that I understood myself more as a religious being than a spiritual one for most of my upbringing, just understanding the do's and don'ts. And I think that actually may connect to some of the issues that we see with why people are leaving. When it just becomes a to-do list or a to-don't list, that becomes really constricting and limiting for people trying to explore their sense of why they are the way they are and what that means and what our essential purpose is. But I think really it was after college. It really took after college, you get your own apartment, you're like, how do I cook? How do I do this? How do I be an adult? And I was like, what does it mean to have a soul? What does it mean to connect to other people who have souls? What does it mean to actually live as a Muslim? And how do I understand that for myself? And how do I find community with others to actually feel that it's a real thing? It's a thing that it will help me, guide me through all of the trials and tribulations, just as it guided my ancestors. And so it really took becoming an adult, like moving to a city. I moved to Washington, D.C., found a spiritual circle of other young millennials who wanted to be in conversation with one another about spirituality and not just be talked at. We didn't want to just go to the mosque and have someone talk at us and then go home. Like, we had questions and we had things to say. And I think that's a huge part of anyone's spiritual journey, is actually finding your own voice to vocalize what spirituality means for you.
Thank you.
That's heavy right there. I was not a searcher at all coming up. I was a knucklehead from the south side of Chicago. You know, before I knew one scripture, I knew every word totally crossed out in doggy style. You know, like, that was me. That was how I came up. That was how I thought. The first language that I knew fluently was hip hop, you know, and I was a kid of that. And for me, it was running into folks like the 5%ers and other people who would like say something and I'd be like, yeah, you're right. How come they don't say that in church? Because, you know, I went to church, but I was forced to go to church. I went to church because I had to. And I didn't have a choice at all. And so the moment that I began to really explore my faith deeper was through hip hop. It was Common. It was the One Day It'll All Make Sense album. I heard that, and he did the Retrospect for Life and other records where he was just like dropping, like really kicking knowledge. And I was like, whoa, what is he talking about? He go to church in Chicago? Where? I got to be there. I got to see what that's about, you know? And really started to explore that more and more and more. But even still, I couldn't commit myself because being a child of hip hop, I wasn't invited to always show up fully into those spaces. It was like, you could be here, but you know, every black person knows that experience. Like, oh, you good. We want you around, but don't all that black stuff. You know, for me, it was like with hip hop, like all that rap stuff, we're not doing all that. We're gonna go to a higher level here, brother. And for me, it was just like, no, this is who I am, this is me, and I couldn't reconcile that. And so I really couldn't be in church until I could find spaces that said, whoever you are, you can be here. And then once I was there, then it was like, okay, we're in a relationship. It's clear you love me. Tell me about your God. You know, all right, let me hear about this Jesus, you know, and all of that. And then could go in there. And it's still a fight, you know, because, yeah, because of orthodoxy. Like, you know, what's right and what's wrong is still something that I wrestle with a lot amongst my peers. But it's certainly a journey that feels worth it every step of the way, especially when I'm around people who say, hey, Jay, whoever you are, like, be here. We need you here right now, you know? And I think that that's something that, not to editorialize the data too much in terms of why all of this is happening, but I'm running into young people all the time that are saying, like, I can't fully be here. So our parents had to go. Even if they couldn't fully be here, they had to go. Because the church, the mosque, the temple, that was the place, that was the community center, that was everything. And now that you can go get community a ton of places. So it's like, oh, well, I ain't going to church. I ain't going to mosque because they don't love me. They don't even like me. So why would I go there?
That's good. Chardonnay, did you have?
Is this thing on? Okay, cool. I think my introduction to my personal spiritual practice definitely came further into my adulthood. As a child, similarly to the two on the end here, I was forced to go to church. It was more of a religious practice, very understood as something that was mandatory and had to be done. And that included choir rehearsal, you know, like singing in the choir. These are your duties as a member of the church, were to participate in some way, shape, or form. This was how you paid back. You were on the usher board, or you did this, and so on and so forth. But I think the older I got, the more disconnected I became from those reasons of going to church. And eventually I kind of stopped going. And I've come to a place where my spiritual practice is very internal. It's very quiet. It's very rooted in African tradition. It's very rooted in many different traditions, I think. I use a number of different spiritual practices every day, so, yeah.
Thank you. So, and you guys begin to touch on it. What are the factors? Why are Black millennials, in your opinion, leaving organized religion? What are some of those factors? So we know, per the data, that we're leaving, but why do you believe that we're leaving?
I can think of a few reasons.
Lay them on the table.
I think, number one, we're in a situation where we are expected to serve religion, and not enough emphasis is placed on religion serving us. You know, as the brother said earlier, understanding, you know, how we actually will grow from this, how we will actually come through the condition that we're in, how we'll actually raise to another station through religion, and how that can serve our needs. the relevance piece is missing, and it's more of what can you do for this institution? What is your obligation to this institution, rather than like, what is this institution doing for you? So I think that's one thing. Number two, I also think we are in the age of a lot of information, and I feel like the leaders, religious leaders, you see scandal after scandal, you see people's mistake, and when you equate sort of a leader or a figurehead with God or the religion itself, that can create a faith crisis. If someone who you've learned religion from has fallen, then where does that really leave you if you haven't actually taken ownership of your religious, relationship to God, and you've been using an intermediary for that? What happens when that intermediary proves themselves to be human? So I definitely think that's an aspect. And then the third thing is, I think we as millennials have definitely come of age in a time where no institution, no matter how expansive or powerful, is beyond critique, because they don't work for us. We have seen the evils of capitalism. We are questioning whether prisons should exist. We are really thinking beyond like what the world is, and we're thinking imaginatively about what the world could be. And so I think religious institutions are a part of that conversation, and a necessary part of that conversation, when we're saying, are these things serving us, or are they limiting us? So those are a few of my thoughts on why I think people are leaving.
Jump in.
Yeah, if I may. For me, it's not a point of, and I know you may mention to it, I'll just clarify this as I proceed with my statement. It's not a point of what you practice, because for me, you put Black up there for a reason. We created everything. So for her saying she's a Buddhist, she doesn't think different than I do, because the base of what we believe is the same. Like I said earlier, it's about bringing in peace and equity, justice. Whether you're a Christian or this, the foundation of what you believe should be the same. So when you're asking why why millennials leaving faith, it's because, once again, we have to understand what faith is. Are we really leaving faith? You see what I'm saying? Are we really leaving organized religions, or are we leaving what somebody has contextualized us in? You see what I'm saying? A lot of our so-called leaders are putting us in a box where we are being restrained and held back and not being able to properly develop ourselves in a means that we are empowered. Your institution of higher learning should do what? It should empower you. But if you go into that institution and you don't come out any better than you did when you went in, that's a problem. So that's just self-preservation kicks in and says, hey, man, this ain't doing nothing for me. So what do I need to do? I need to create something that has the fundamental understanding of how to overcome my circumstances and situations. Because whether you're a Black Buddhist, a Black Christian, a Black Muslim, a Black Hebrew, your problems, especially in America, are going to be the same. So if that's the context that we're operating in, then that gives room for us to say, hey, we probably should put those titles down and let's focus on the said problem right before us. How do we overcome the situations that, especially in Chicago, that our young Black men are dying in droves? How do we overcome the circumstances where our young Black women are being raped and molested and taken advantage of and not properly treated and respected? How do we overcome these things? How do we build communities that are conducive to life and not havens of murder and mayhem? These are the questions that we need to be posing to our youth. Not did you go to Sunday school, not did you go to mosque service on Friday. That's not even important, because if those institutions are not bringing solutions to these problems, then they don't have any relevance in the millennials' lives. And they see that, and we see that more than ever. So I'm telling you, maybe it's a good thing that we're leaving so-called organized religion, because they're not able to produce the substantive change that we need.
Good. Well, I think that he's absolutely right in the sense that there can be some good function out of this, and that it's raising the question now that we've never asked before. And the question is like, okay, church, make your case. The church never needed to make a case. You went because it was the only show in town. Where else are you gonna go? If you was Baptist, you went to First Baptist. Like that was it. The second church was called Second Baptist. No case needed to be made. And now I think as our sister is saying, as people are beginning to ask, not for the first time in human history, but in some very articulate ways and some poignant ways, we're not leaving the question about the world that we want to create. Okay, church, make your case. And it's very difficult for the church to make a case when it's hurting people. it's very difficult to make that case when it's saying you can only be here in a certain way, when it's saying to women you can be here but you can't preach, or it's saying to people who of different sexualities, transgender folks, and saying like, oh, you can be here, but we never gonna discuss it. Let's just agree to never talk about it. It's hard to make a case when we live in a context right now where particularity is very important, and what the particularity that we bring into this space, and then to go and sit in a space every week that's saying, we have no particularity, in God we're all the same. No, we ain't the same. We are not the same. We are radically different, and that's beautiful. We don't need to try to wipe away that difference with faith. We need to try to use our faith to faithfully understand and wrestle with that difference before we kill each other, because that's what's happening on the news every day. They're just saying, hey, just kill each other. You know what you should do, right? Just join the right side and hate the other side. You know, and faith can give us an opportunity to do something different, but this moment has raised that question for the first time.
I'd like to share, as someone who works with people in larger capacities, but also in one-on-one and energy healing sessions, and helping them kind of in intuitive wellness. A large seed of what I hear all the time is these practices that we have of laying hands, which is really energy healing. These practices that we have of hearing prophetic words, which is also divination. These practices, I think there hasn't been the container created to take these practices home. And I think it was something that Jermira was saying about having something to be able to take with you home that can give you a sense of well-being and empowerment, and a practice that you can say like, I don't need to wait on the powers that be, the person that's installed into this institution, to take this spiritual practice and to use it before I'm going to work, to use it when I have done all of my activism and I'm burned out and I'm tired and I need a way of refilling and refueling. And so a part of what I've heard just in the practice of walking people through intuitive wellness is this need for something yes, faith-based and spiritual, but also tangible and also accessible, and not having to wait for the priest or the bishop or the imam, et cetera, to bestow upon you, yes, now you may engage in spirituality, right? So how can we, and so I think that's the seeds of what I hear around how do we take some of the practices that work and how do we use them in our everyday lives? And because that connection is not being made, I think it makes a harder case to be like, okay, so then how are these practices helpful for our socio-cultural reality and the things that we're going through? And so I think that that's a part of the moving away from a system, but I don't think it's a movement away just for movement's sake. I think that there's like a rebirth and a reorganizing and a tearing shit up and a breaking shit down and a turning shit around that is actually happening when we're not in a pew space. And that needs to be allowed to happen because that's how change comes.
Thank you.
Most people go to are seeking some sort of spirituality or religion so they can feel empowered, have courage, have wisdom. We all have innate wisdom within us. We need to be taught the tools to tap into that wisdom, to have the wisdom and courage. So a lot of places aren't teaching you how you can gain the knowledge to overcome your situation. You know, for me, through chanting, when I'm like, I'll be all over the place and I'm looking, my life condition is low, I'm looking at things from a linear perspective. As my life condition elevates through prayer, I'm able to see things from a higher viewpoint and not feel hopeless, not feel like I'm just, a scarcity or lack mindset. I'm able to see more possibilities, and quite frequently, immediately almost, just with concrete prayer, not begging, not hoping, absolute conviction that I'm gonna break through whatever is in front of me. And so that's what I feel like, okay, well, I'm just here and I'm getting talked to, and okay, I still feel the same. I don't feel like, okay, you can do whatever, you can go home and you can pray yourself and you can receive the wisdom. And it's not gonna come in a conventional way. It may come through him, through dialogue, from, well, my prayer was answered. I was praying for something, then I met this guy and he ended up telling me the exact same thing that I was praying for. That's not a coincidence. Some things are gonna, or you might go on social media and you might find, oh, okay, that was what I was, that answer. It's not, it can come in non-conventional ways, and we need to be taught that and shown that to how to get that to that point.
Besheer, with this leaving, what is the data saying about the rise of Black millennials that are identifying as atheists, that are identifying as non-believers or agnostic? So we know that millennials are leaving, but there also is an uptick of, some would say, also the spiritual but not religious identification. What is the data saying around this sector of Black millennials?
So the data there is actually, it's really interesting and a little bit complicated, because we definitely see people leaving organized religion, leaving faith, and we see an uptick in the number who are atheists or agnostic, who are rejecting God. But most people, most Black millennials that are leaving faith, organized religion, are not becoming atheists, are continuing to believe in God. They continue to believe in some higher power. They're just not getting that nurturing from an organized religion, from a label of I'm Christian, I'm Muslim, I'm Jewish. The people that are leaving are saying, okay, I'm not any of these things, but I still believe in God. I still think that there's something out there. So we absolutely see that pattern going on. And in terms of the question of whether you're spiritual or you're religious or you're both or you're neither, it's interesting because what we see is that most people either are both spiritual and religious. For a lot of people, they're not separate, or neither spiritual nor religious. I don't want anything to do with any of this. Okay, and this is even people who say they identify with a religion. They'll say, okay, I was raised Catholic, I was raised Baptist, but I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, I'm just trying to live my life. So those are the most common things. And then there are some people that say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, or even fewer who say they're religious, but not spiritual. But by and large, people see these things as together. Either they're finding their spiritual needs met with religion, or they're giving up on the whole thing and just saying, you know what, I'm just gonna go through my life and not appeal to any of this other stuff. While at the same time, as I said, continuing to say that there's some God, some higher power, but just not expecting that to have a large impact in their life on the day-to-day.
Thank you. Many of the reasons that millennials, and we begin to touch on this, but I want us to go a little deeper into it. Many of the reasons that millennials are disengaging with religion is the constrictors or the range of expression of human sexuality and embodiment. Can you react to that? Do you see gender and sexuality playing a role in why Black millennials are choosing to disengage? If so, how and why? I see that face, Jade.
I could jump in just real quickly. I know we're jumping at the bit here. This is an interesting one. But I could just jump in quickly and say that one thing that we do absolutely see is if you take something as simple as whether homosexuality should be accepted by society or not. Young people are much more likely to believe that homosexuality should be accepted by society, whereas older folks are much more likely to say, no, society needs to be discouraging that. Society needs to be tamping that down. We don't need people coming out and doing all these things, regardless of what they believe about, whether it's innate or whether it's something that's developed. They think society should not be encouraging it. Whereas the younger folks, by and large, the majority, are saying, no, society needs to just let people be whoever they are. And so to the extent that sense is not one that's nurtured by the church, there's going to be some friction there.
Anyone, feel free to jump in.
Absolutely. Once again, it's a beautiful question, and I think context is always needed. When you look at why millennials, again, is leaving faith or spirituality, or that conflict of two, as I answer your question, spirituality, as Sister, she just identifies spirituality, it's a science. It's a process. It's like mathematics. If I do this, and it will produce that. She had positive affirmations. She made prayers. She talked to the God inside of herself. She spoke to her inner being, and then she brought it into fruition. She manifested it. That's a science. That's not overlooked. Religion is just a construct or a form of governance that we operate under. It's simple. We've made it something else than what it really is. And so when you ask, is sexuality a premise where it's bringing or being discouraging for millennials to be participants in religion or spirituality? It depends what that religion is dictating. That's all it is. So if they say these are our guidelines, these are our principles, this is what we say is the rules, then that's what you follow. Or if not, you don't be a part of it. Just like any law here in America. You can't drive on the streets without a driver's license. As much as you feel you're an efficient driver, if you get caught without driving without a driver's license, you get arrested. I'm saying it's just rules, it's sets and boundaries. Now, has sexuality been weaponized? Of course it has been. And we can't excuse that as a real factor in how it's being used in our youth. We have been over-sexualized, and it has nothing to do with homosexuality or queerism, just sexualization, period. Men who are in heterosexual relationships are lusting more than they should be. Women are being sexualized more than they should be, and that's a greater problem as well, because that takes away from everything that we spoke about that's at hand. You can't be focused on two enemies at once. You have to focus your attention on one particular thing and circumstance. So one thing that warfare creates is deception, meaning that it has to be deceit. It has to be something that distracts you from what's going on. Why am I saying that? Sexualization, whether you believe homosexuality or queerism is something that it should be accepted, that's your own personal belief. But the problem comes in when now it's forced upon, or if somebody doesn't agree with it, now it's a conflict instead of having a conversation about it. That's where the problem comes in, especially in constructed religion as it is today. Now you just have to come to the understanding, okay, if I'm going to participate in this, what is the benefit? What is the plan? What is the goal? What is the objective? Versus, this is what I want to do, and if you don't like it, then you're a hater of people, because people are being brandished the same way as we're being homophobic. You've got heterosexual people being brandished as people that don't like homosexuals because that's not a lifestyle that they choose for themselves, and that's a false equivalency as well, because that's not always the case. We just refuse to have proper dialogue to come to some type of consensus of understanding. And I think that is a greater tool that has been used to keep us arguing and fighting and not focus on the bigger picture. And the root of everything here, especially for black people, like I said earlier, is you're going to have to look at the idea of white supremacy. You're going to have to look at the idea of institutional racism. Those things cannot be overlooked. And when you kind of work away the dirt, it's going to always be there. And that, if we don't address that, everything else is immaterial.
Thank you. I saw some hands, some eyes. Jump in.
All of us up here have different faith beliefs, but the common denominator in all our faith beliefs is absolute happiness, harmonious communities, and a peaceful society, world peace. And so to me, someone's sexual preference or sexual, whatever they decide to do behind closed doors should not block them from becoming happy or getting the wisdom that they need, the tools that they need to become happy. And so people project their own personal beliefs and then put the title of the religion behind it. And so, if, like you said, of the older generation which is probably their parents, not against this type of particular lifestyle. So it leaves the millennial of that sexual preference feeling isolated, alone, which can lead to, suicidal or homicidal behavior, and causing them to suffer even longer because they feel like they don't have a way to go. One thing I like about the SGI USA, we have different auxiliary groups that include people of different culture, gender, sexuality, different language. So it's all inclusive because we're all human at the end of the day.
Thank you.
I can tell you about my face, Teddy. So here's why I made that face. For those of you who don't know me, I am very queer. I am very pansexual. I am very sensual. And I am very grateful to the divine for making me that way. And for me, whether or not the institutions of organized religion catch up with that is not my primary interest. What my primary interest is that people can understand that no matter where they are on the spectrum, the divine in ourselves, the divine outside of ourselves is ready and there to support us. And I think what is interesting is that when you look at 19th century Victorian purity ideals, these ideals have made their way into spaces and places that are religiously affiliated out of a need that was in the context of that time for respectability. And in order to get very tangible things like jobs and careers and be able to make their way, there was a lot of this adopting of 19th century Victorian purity ideals to be able to kind of make the way through society. And this is a story that is deeply rooted in Black history that we don't talk about a lot, because it's one of those things that a lot of us were just raised. You put your lap cloth on and you do all of these different things based on your gender expression. And so I think for us, that's an interesting conversation that I'm always willing to have, is how much are we talking about theology and how much are we talking about Victorian era purity ideals? And are those things the same thing? That's a question. Y'all can journal that on the way home. I'm not gonna answer for it, but you can journal it on the way home. And so I think that I would be interested in seeing spaces and places have this conversation, but I would be interested in having these conversations with integrity, knowing that queer people, we are always in the room. Whether you know we are or whether you don't, we are always in the room. And so what I'd like to see is a serious lived theology and lived experience being brought to the table and to the conversation, instead of this kind of banking deposit method of, I will tell you my theology and you will adopt it, and you will receive it. And so I think that that's another interesting conversation that I believe that millennials are having outside of these religious spaces and places. And if they're happening inside of religious spaces and places, tell me after this is over so I can know what folks are talking about. But I do hear this more, and I think that there's a question coming about social media, but I do think that there's a very interesting kind of cross-section of what we now have access to, the information we now have access to about sexuality and sensuality and theology. And I think we're at a place where we're understanding that those things are not as split and as dichotomous as we once thought that they were.
Thank you, Jade.
Well, not to take the conversation away from this, because I'm loving this, but your question also mentioned gender. And I think, no disrespect to my men on the panel, but I really do think that we underestimate and we don't talk about enough how many of our religious traditions have been interpreted, passed on, taught, led by men and for men. And I think that has limited a lot of us. I think that it doesn't force our leaders to interrogate like what that means to carry male privilege in a space that sees you as a religious and spiritual being and not just as someone's mother, wife, etc., which also is important. I don't want to diminish those identities in any way, but I can't tell you how many lectures, sermons I've sat in where the only time I'm spoken to is, sisters, you're not dressing well, or sisters, you're exploring your sexuality. Like, it's always in a way, sisters, you need to control that, but brothers, let's talk about God. Let's talk about your purpose. Let's talk about your intentions. And it's just like, I'm sitting there like, what? Like, I'm a person. But I really think that part of why you see these younger millennials looking for other spaces is because all of us are not fully recognized as human in these spaces. And I feel like that's the underlying thread here. Is like, when your humanity is in question, why would you even sit there and, you can't engage in a conversation with someone that doesn't believe that you have a right to be there and feel all of the things and experience the things that they do.
Thank you.
1,000% agree, and it helps me say even less here, which is that, of the panelists, I guess me and Teddy are the only ones who's got our religion via white supremacy, right? And the tool of supremacy is control, is to say, you can have your spirit, your body's mine, your body belongs to me. And that's always been used as a way to tell people, hey, have your faith, do your thing, but I'm gonna abuse you as much as I want to. and you go pray about it. Right? That's a tool of supremacy that the church, I can only speak for the church, is still participating in. Not only through gender, but sexuality as well, still participating in that, hey, let's take care of your soul, but your body belongs to me. And people never say that, but that's really what's felt. It belongs to male leaders, right, of denominations and of practices. That's where your body belongs to, and we'll tell you what you can and you can't do with it. The byproduct of that is also a basic dissecting of people, right? To say that, like, body and spirit are separate, and that this is normative in ways that are, you just said it, it's dehumanizing, and that's the biggest problem. I think we're leaving because we're recognizing that the practice of organized religion has participated in supremacy and dehumanization for so long.
Rae, did you have anything?
I've been thinking about this like hard body. Growing up as a person who didn't really know that I was queer, but I knew I was different, that's not foreign, you know, that's not an unfamiliar tale. But seeing in the church how bad it was ridiculed, how terrible it was to be gay, and you couldn't be gay and go to church at the same time, but if you were a weirdo, and nobody really believed that you actually believed in God. There's just all these different weird anecdotes around being a believer and being gay, or queer, or lesbian, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that part of how that has pushed millennials out of organized religion is really based in a lot of patriarchy, obviously, misogynoir, all those things. And I think that it shows very vividly in our spiritual practice that religion had nothing really to do with how we were caring for ourselves or how we want to continue to care for ourselves, that it is a very spiritually based, it's a spiritual practice really as a queer person to want to take care of yourself. I think that I know for a fact Chicago has a church that is led by a gay pastor and his husband, and I think it's Fire something, somebody knows, maybe not. Yeah, it's quite a few of them. But yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought. That's okay.
It's all right.
Go to the next question.
We'll come back to you. But I do want to follow that question up because it's a question I posed at a previous panel, and I'm going to pose it to the Black women on this panel. Are Black religious spaces safe for you? Because I think that's the underlining thing that's being said. Do you find those spaces safe? And if not, why? And if not, what has been your response to those spaces not being shelters? And caring and nurturing and providing spaces with integrity for you?
Are you gonna go, Jade?
Please.
The one unique thing I like about the SGI USA is it's a lot of member care. So there's women's division and young women's division, young men's and men. So when we support each other in faith in divisions like that. So I will go do a home visit to a women's division member as a women's division leader. So that is a safe place where it is, you know, it's just you. Men are not allowed to go to do home visits, or a man can accompany a woman. But I feel very safe and welcoming, especially in that atmosphere, since a lot of our activities are in the home.
Good. Thank you.
It's actually been a long time since I've personally stepped foot into any religious practicing space, unless it was for a funeral. And I personally have not felt very safe. Growing up, I didn't feel very safe. Currently, I don't feel the safest. I don't feel like the spaces are as welcoming. Again, you all touched on how women are just treated small in religious spaces. And I've never really felt safe in those spaces. A lot of times it's because of predatory energy. It's because of the judgment that you can literally see seeping off of people's faces for various number of reasons. And and just a true feeling of not being fully accepted. Like you said earlier, if I can't come in here as my full self, then that makes me uncomfortable, that makes me feel unsafe. If I know that your perspective is this thing about me as a person, that makes me feel unsafe, because I don't know how you respond if you are maybe offended by me or what have you.
I think for all of I shared in the beginning that I grew up in the Black church, in a Black spiritualist church, and for all of the beautiful, tangible spiritual practices that it taught me, I have had to learn a lot of harmful theology around being a woman, being a Black woman, and have had to completely do away with the gender script of what a woman is supposed to be doing. And so I think when you pose this question of has it been safe for Jade T. Perry, no, it has not been safe. And I think that there are a lot of places that I've gone and talked with people, especially in my work as a mystic and as one who encourages reflection and introspection. There's a lot of seeds and instances and containers that are simply not safe because of things like patriarchy. And when we talk about patriarchy, what we're talking about is the assumption that males or male-presenting people or men should be the theological spokesperson for everyone. One of the things that I find to be a little bit more insidious, but is also unsafe, I'd like to uplift the work of Dr. Timora Lomax. And if you've ever heard of this prolific doctor, oh my gosh, they're amazing. But they talk about the pornographic gaze that sometimes the Black church male leaders and their colleagues have on Black women, particularly in the church context. What that means is that there is money to be made and there is a fetishization of Black women and Black femmes being broken, needing to be loosed, needing to be healed. So it creates this space of not only patriarchal oppression, but a continuous kind of feedback loop of feeling like you're only helpful in this space unless you're serving, unless you're married in a very heterosexual way, or unless you're broken and now you can buy all of my books and my CDs and subscribe to this so that you can be fixed. But really, we don't want you to be fixed because then our sales will decrease. And so I think that what we have to talk about these notions, and like I said, that's uplifting the work of Dr. Timora Lomax, look them up. But I think that it's not safe, yes, because of patriarchal oppression, but it's also unsafe because of benevolent sexism. And that is the sexism that says, we're not gonna say you can't serve, we're just gonna plant the seed that you're actually broken and that you're actually not, you can't have these conversations with the divine, and the divine in you, what are you talking about? Go ask your husband how to do these things. That is benevolent sexism. And so I think that no matter where you slice it, the question of is it safe can be easily answered with a yes or no. I think the question underlying it is why is it unsafe, and what are the insidious ways that it is unsafe?
Thank you. Good.
I mean, there's really nothing else to say, but I feel like, honestly, being a woman in religious spaces, y'all seen The Color Purple? She's like, all my life I had to fight. And that's like, it really does feel like, to the extent that there is safety, we're fighting for it. We are protecting each other. We are carving out little safe spaces, and then we're scoping it out. Do you know about this guy? Do you know about this space? Do you know about this place? What's that like? Especially going to the mosque. Do they have a place for women to pray? How do I have to be dressed? Being a Black woman, what language do they speak? There's just a lot that's packed into like what it means to create safety for yourself, and we've had to take on that role. Now, thinking about what safety means, are we just talking about the body? Because in a lot of spaces, we do have physical safety. We do have brothers standing guard, offering to escort you. There's some benevolent sexism in that as well, but we're also talking about the soul and the spirit. Is there spiritual safety in these spaces? I think we actually have a really, really long way to go. And I feel like one of the main conversations I have with my female friends is just like, what do we do? You can't be what you can't see. And we go into these spaces, and a lot of times, you know, I'm in mixed company. I'm trying not to reveal too much, but you know, you go into a mosque sometimes, you can't even see the speaker. You're in a different room. You're watching from a TV screen. Hopefully it works, you know? And so it's just like really feeling physically disconnected, physically isolated. So you don't even have a relationship with the preacher. You don't even have a relationship with the person who's leading the community. So if you have an issue with one of the other congregants, if someone has actually threatened your safety, who are they to trust? You know, they're going to trust the person that they can see sitting in front of them, who is a man. So I think to the extent that safety exists, it is fragile, it is fickle, and it is something that we fight for every single place that we go. And I know that as I've gotten older, I've gotten, you know, more, I stand a little bit taller, I just don't care. And I work with the people that I go with to create that sense of safety, if not just for myself, for others that are coming up behind me that maybe are looking over their shoulder. But it's a huge burden and responsibility to carry, but it has to change.
Thank you, ladies. One more question to you before we go to questions from social media and from our audience. What has been the impact of social media in creating spaces for millennials to process theology and make meaningful faith connections? What has been that impact of social media?
I've seen, I'm in a few groups on Facebook, Black Girl Spirituality or Black Girls Healing, and a lot of people they ask, is it okay to practice spirituality? I'm going away from the church or Christianity. They're seeking approval and validation to have a connection with the divinity within them. So it's almost like it's so deeply ingrained that we have to be in this box and category. Okay, well, you're Buddhist, you shouldn't have any spirituality, you can't listen to Trapp music, you can't listen to gospel music. Like, you're Buddhist, you probably worship a statue. No, they don't know. So they're trying to figure out how to navigate where their soul is pulling them without a title that society has given them. So a lot of times I'm just like, I'll respond like, you can do whatever you want to do. No one's going to judge you, because at the end of the day, you have to become happy and make with every decision that you made.
I would say social media is definitely a double-edged sword, and I say this because whenever you have, history is replete with examples, whenever you have billion-dollar institutions, they have an agenda. They have intentions, they have motives. So when you go on these social media sites and you see, well, you got access to 1 billion people and everybody's able to articulate their message, that's not always the case. They have algorithms put in place where certain speech, certain voices are being muted. As we know with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, how he was muted on Facebook because he was speaking out to certain injustices that we didn't want, or that intended operation and organization, which is Facebook, did not want out because it was in total opposite or in opposition to what they're trying to push, And so when I go on Facebook, that's why these conversations are so important, that we galvanize each other and we create spaces amongst each other, because we got to get back to the grassroots pushing of knowledge and information and understanding and implementation of what we need to be done. Because when you start to promote on such a mass level certain positions or agendas, it can easily be interpreted and then misinterpreted. So now somebody takes your words and they put their spin on it. Now what you intended to put out there is totally different than how it's received. And now you are brandished or labeled someone as a hater, or you are brandished or labeled somebody who's out there spreading hate speech and trying to bring down your brother and your sister. And I was listening to the conversation, and I only just want to mention this in relationship to Facebook. This is how we keep missing the boat. We keep thinking that we're each other's adversary enemies. I'm not saying anybody said that on this particular panel, but when you look out, we're put in position where the black men and black women are at odds. We are looked at as if I'm your threat, I'm your problem. How are we even having the conversation that we're saying our women are unsafe in the place where they're supposed to be the most safe? Safer than their homes. You see what I'm saying? What has produced that? And that's why we have to go to the root of things, because the men have been damaged and destroyed. We've been buck broken. You see what I'm saying? We've been mutilated. We've been castrated. We've been destroyed in every possible aspect. And that's not even going to the spiritual and mental and psychological. That's just the physical. So we are, for all intents and purposes, a half of a person. So no, in those circumstances and situations, we don't have the ability to do what is necessary. But those are, and they are people out there who do have an understanding and say, hold on, we was going about that the wrong way. That's why I said in my statement, as it relates to homosexuality, may I don't personally practice, I never said that I hate you or hate this. Let's have a conversation. Let's have an understanding. Let's talk about your perspective versus my perspective, because at some point we're going to have to come at a happy medium if we're going to coexist. And that's what Facebook cannot do for our people. It's too much of a robotic response versus human interaction. And so, no, Facebook, though it has the ability to promote message to millions of people, it doesn't have the ability to promote the right message to millions of people. And that's why these conversations are so important, because we're able to touch each other. You know what I'm saying? We're able to work out these differences and these discrepancies that may come up in our conversation, because we haven't been talking to each other. So we have to learn how to talk. But like I said earlier, we got to learn how to listen and not hear those trigger words. Well, he said he don't like that, so that means he... No, it's more to that. We're more complex beings than sound bites or 140 character tweets. You see what I'm saying? That's what social media has put out there that has been destructive force in our communities. And that's why we have to get back to the grassroots operation of things, where we get back to touching our brothers and sisters and realizing how do we work together cohesively to produce something that is better for our people. Yeah.
So the conversation is good, and I have a whole bunch more questions down here. But what we're going to do is give a chance for our audience, those of you that are at home, those of you that are in the building, to pose questions to the panelists. And so, again, we want to encourage you to use the hashtag GodTalk, use the hashtag BlackFaith, and at the museum at NMAAHC, so that we can track your questions and potentially pose them to the panelists. I'm going to turn it over to our social media host, Elise Preston, who's out in the audience and has questions from our online visitors and also those here in person. Elise.
Yes, Teddy, as social media is now playing part in this conversation, we have several questions from social media, as well as our audience members right here in Chicago. And Deanna Griffin says it's interesting that so many panelists are saying faith leaders and institutions aren't really teaching and empowering people. At what point do we stop blaming and become responsible for our own faith, studying and learning how to pray ourselves?
Anyone jump in?
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll be brief.
Now,
I know, right? That's the oxymoron, right? So this is what we're doing. We're taking responsibility for our actions. We're taking responsibility for the inadequacy that we see amongst previous generations. I mentioned the Most Honorable Elijah Mohamed. He teaches that your nature is righteousness. We don't have to teach you how to be a person that believes in God or knows that you are God. That's already who you are. But what the thing that we do have to do, we have to create an environment where it's cultivated. That's the key, and that's what this is right now. This panel discussion is us taking responsibility and accountability for our actions and for the actions of those who preceded us. So that was brief. I told you I'd be brief.
That was good. That was good, Yosef. I like that. Anyone else?
We live in a society where everyone has a groupthink mentality. They follow the energy of the collective conscious. People will be suffering, but still sitting in whatever church or temple or hall and not want to follow their spirit of where they need to go to get the answers. So I think if we can shift the paradigm of society saying like, this is right, this is wrong, then people can just find their own way and connect and like, okay, oh, well, you don't believe in anything, or you're Muslim, or I'm Buddhist, like, you're not right or wrong, or why, surprised to see this, but it's encouraged, like you said, to have one-on-one dialogue with each other, to get to know each other, and that's what's not happening.
When do we decide to learn these practices for ourselves? Is whenever it makes sense for you. And so I think that I want to uplift that for the person who posed that question, and really for anyone that's in the audience who's like, I may have been feeling this pull to explore this, or to do this, or to learn this, or to read this book. If you're feeling that pull, that now is the time, then can't nobody tell you that now isn't the time. And so I think that what's important is that you're listening. You're listening to spirit. You're listening to your own heart. You're listening to the practices that call to you, and at the very minimum, learning a little bit more about them, so that then you can decide and discern, okay, this is a practice that I feel like will add to my sustenance.
And if I could add, I personally feel like your spirituality isn't complete until you take responsibility for it.
Yes.
I think if you outsource that, you're setting yourself up for a really dangerous situation because you lose control. And I think a turning point in my own spiritual journey was actively realizing that God created me, God knows me, God loves me, and my relationship with God is my own to develop, and it's my own to figure out, and it is not something that I'm going to place in the hands of anyone else. And in my tradition, we were taught that God judges you based on your intentions, based on your actions, based on your choices that you make for yourself. So, whatever these religious institutions are doing that are incredibly frustrating to us and limiting and all the things that we've talked about, at the end of the day, that's not what I have to worry about. I have to worry about myself, my own spiritual self, and my relationship with God.
Our next question comes from an audience member right here in Chicago. Who is God?
That's a great question.
Come on, question.
Come on, question.
Yeah.
We need about another hour for that one.
That's what I'm saying. Like, can we just go?
Anybody, feel free to jump in.
You God.
I can attempt.
Okay.
I believe that there is one divine reality that unites us all, whether that's ancestors to descendants, whether that's the mountain to the blades of grass, that there is intentionality, that we were all created with intentionality, and that we are living, there's a certain type of balance that we were created in, and we're seeing the repercussions now of sort of getting off balance, and that God wants that balance to be restored. So God, to me, is this idea that the world was created with intention, and that there was an overarching entity that had intention and purpose for why we are all here, and how we are all to figure out how to restore that balance.
I think you have to, especially in our circumstance and situation, know that you are God. If you make God other than man and woman, then you're making God less than what he could be. We've created an image and a likeness of, if we have the power to produce change, not that you create the universe, I'm not saying that, but you have to be God, meaning you have to carry that understanding, that responsibility, that obligation everywhere you go. You have to know that the power resides inside of you and cannot be externally forced upon you as we so reluctantly do in our affairs. We give people dominion over our lives instead of taking responsibility of ourselves. So you have to be able to identify God yourself to have power to change your circumstances. You're God. But man, your beautiful self.
Hey, back at you, brother. Anyone else?
That's the talk I grew up with. I like that right there. You know what I'm saying? How come they ain't saying that in church? For me, not to refuse the question, questions about who, even who am I, have always been interpreted for me as how am I? How is God? How is God is I think, the most important question for us. And I see infinite creativity and a force that goes beyond our doubts and can meet all of our needs in the midst of our difference, and can find ways to love all of us in just the way we need and to make us community again. I think that's how God is.
Okay.
I love that question. I love a good journal question. That's a good journal question. And I think that for me, God is the energy that I both love and wrestle with. And question openly and talk about openly and pose questions to frequently. And the way that I see God is sometimes as a source that is outside of myself, sometimes is a source that has a large, huge universal energy, and that sometimes is myself, and that sometimes is you, and that sometimes is the earth. And so I think that this question of who is God and how is God can be as expansive as we are expansive. And so I love that question because it's such a beautiful and expansive question. I believe that God is genderless. I believe that God is genderful. I believe that God is all of these things because I'm not the only one that gets to define God. And I think the collective thoughts that we have about God, I'm really, really interested in hearing and knowing more about, both here and outside of here.
Thank you. Elise, we have time for one more question.
Okay, our last question. You all have touched on these topics a little bit, but Kelsey Stone, who's here in Chicago, would like to know, how can religion help alleviate current social issues, including police brutality, the Me Too movement, and the rising rate of Black trans women being killed?
Anyone?
I think that and I've experienced this personally in some painful ways, I think that churches need to take responsibility for the power that they do have in communities to gather people together. And the power of community itself, even though we are all responsible for our faiths and whatnot, but to recognize that churches have been able to move people and been able to do things. In '65, when King was here, Mayor Daley said Boss Daley, Pharaoh Daley said for a reason, hey, y'all Southside churches, don't mess with him, right? Because he knew that if they did, something would happen, right? And just as early as a few years ago, and it's still happening now, when people were saying, hey, we should have a trauma center on the South Side, churches were like, we ain't getting into that because we don't want to upset the city. We don't want to upset the University of Chicago. We don't want to upset the city of Chicago. You know, like, come on, what are we talking about here? I think we just need to take responsibility as church leaders. I'm speaking for myself and my knucklehead peers, of which I am one, that we need to take responsibility that, yeah, we can't move people and tell people what to do, but that churches and faith communities have political power to change circumstances in communities and need to take responsibility for that power that they have.
In my Buddhist practice, President Indicator says the transformation of the individual leads to the transformation of society. So once again, when the individual is empowered and is praying and is able to have wisdom and able to have compassion and courage and through the wisdom to act off of the information, to have the courage to act off of, then you can see a change. So if I'm oppressed at my individual job, but I don't feel empowered, I'm not gonna take action. Or I might take action, but it may be an emotional action. It may not get the results, but through wisdom and courage, I'm able to have a lasting impact. So we need to know that each of one of us can make a change within ourselves, because we all have the wisdom within us. We just have to tap into it.
Good. Give all of our panelists a round of applause. To Besheer, to Jermira, to Yosef, to Jade, to Julian, and to Makkah. We are indeed grateful for the time. We know the conversation is still going on social media. We know that I have 1,000 more questions to ask them. I'm going to turn it back over to my friend Elise, who's going to take us out.
All right, thanks, Teddy. You are watching God Talk, and we want you to continuously join in the conversation. Use those hashtags, #GodTalk, #BlackFaith, and at the museum at NMAAHC. We have a lot more coming up for you, but we'll be right back after this brief commercial break.
Throughout the 400 years of the brutality of the Middle Passage, enslavement, and the heroic struggle for human and civil rights, faith is what has sustained us as a people. Faith has animated the struggle for racial uplift and social justice. The Smithsonian's Center for the Study of African American Religious Life celebrates the rich diversity of the African American religious experience. By collecting religious artifacts, creating oral histories,
males, particularly blacks, were starting fires.
and engaging in innovative scholarship.
God power depends on human beings giving them worship. And the moment you withdraw worship from any God, that God is dead.
Producing public programs.
As the good doctor who sat here earlier said, you know, every culture around the world sees Jesus and has seen Jesus in their own image. Well, that's an easy way to dismiss, and that's a very important conversation. But in having that conversation, you can dismiss it and put distance between, you know, the fact that that's how you see yourself, and that's cute and that's nice, and you need that to make yourself feel good. No. What we're saying is this historical figure, as you said, it was a first-generation Palestinian Jew, was a man of color. Now,
I believe there's God within each and every one of us. I don't believe necessarily God is outside of us. And I also believe there's a direct correlation between God and the universe. So often we praise to different gods depending on what the religion is, but I think it's all the same.
The center tells the triumphant story of a people who continue to win against enormous odds. It is a compelling American story of how we have indeed come this far by faith.
Thanks again for joining us for God Talk, a Black Millennials and Faith conversation. And of course, we have a panel of experts who are talking to us all night. But again, we want you to join in the conversation. Use that hashtag God Talk, hashtag Black Faith, and at the museum, NMAAHC, to be a part of the conversation so we can use your questions and comments to help shape our conversation. Now, right now, I'm joined by Dr. Doretha Williams. You're the program manager of the Robert Frederick Smith Fund for the digitization of curation of African and American history. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So what is the Robert F. Smith Fund?
Well, the Robert F. Smith Fund was created by, of course, Mr. Robert F. Smith, a wonderful, generous donation of $20 million to the museum to help archive and preserve and collect African American history in communities. So this month, we're here in Chicago for the entire month of September to help individuals preserve their family archives and collections digitally. So we're here and we're working with the DeSable Museum, we're working with Chicago State, Shorefront Legacy in Evanston, and the public library system here in the area to set up sessions for people to bring in their photographs, their VHS tapes of the family reunion, of great-grandmother's 101st birthday party, all those great things that we have in our attics, in our basements, to help digitize and preserve that material. So this is a great time for all of us to go to our great auntie's house, grandma's house, father, mother's house, and to go find those items that really just tell the narrative of our family history and have those items preserved digitally.
Why is that so important, especially for Black people and our families?
Well, it's so important for so many reasons. One, just basic preservation. Some of these items we're not keeping correctly, and they need to make sure that we can preserve them in some way, and digitally is what we can do very quickly and easily. But also to continue the conversation of our family history. So often we may not know what happened to grandmother or grandfather or what have you, and that is so important for families to understand their history, to have these discussions, and to come to the table, the kitchen table, and go through these photographs and look at these old videos so that we can understand where we came from and have this intergenerational conversation. Some of the conversations we're having tonight, how do we bridge the generational gap in the history of understanding our own families, and just collectively as a community understanding issues like migration, the Great Migration to Chicago, looking at business development in this area and all over. So being able to preserve these items tells even a larger story of African American history and culture.
Are you finding a lot of differences within the family as far as generations, as far as how they respond to this history that may or may not be lost?
Yes, definitely. A lot of times when people bring their items in, we may see that, grandmother's bringing in this material that documented her life coming out of Mississippi. Like my ancestors came out of small county in Mississippi, and she may have that reaction. She may have a saddened reaction, or it may trigger some memories, but it's so important to have those conversations with the youth and the younger generation. So we see those different interactions with generations of younger people wanting to know what happened to the family, and then trying to talk with the older generation, having these great, very useful conversations, but also, bringing up different understandings of this history, and it's so very important to still have those discussions.
Is religious preservation, is that part of what you all do at the Robert F. Smith Fund?
We have different ways to target the history, but yes, so documenting church history is something we do as well, and making sure that places of religious expression, those items are collected and preserved as well. We'll be working in Evanston looking at the collection of Ebenezer AME Church. Up there, we also welcome any other churches in the area to bring their items out to be digitized as well.
And I know that you all are based in DC, you're in Chicago, because it's important for everyone to have this opportunity. You mentioned all the places that you'll be. Again, for people who are just tuning in, how do they actually take part in what you guys are doing for families?
Great. Well, there are many ways you can participate. Right now, we'll be at the DeSable Museum until the 21st, so people can either go online to the museum's website and type in community curation, and the sessions where you can actually sign up will pop up on the screen. You can also walk into the DeSable as well and set up and bring your items and set up an appointment to do that as well. You can bring your flat items, and that includes pictures, paper, diplomas, what have you, and then your moving images, so that's your VHS, your audio cassettes, film of all speeds, and you can bring those in, and those will be digitized. We do not keep any of that material. It's all given back, and we give a jump drive to all participants of their material.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for joining us. And we have a lot more coming up on God Talk. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. Thanks again for tuning in to God Talk, a Black Millennials and Faith Conversation. We are having a great time tonight as we explore Black Millennials and their faith, but we want you to be a part of the conversation. So again, use those hashtags God Talk, hashtag Black Faith, and at the museum at NMAAHC. Now again, we have been chatting with audience members all night, and I'm joined now by Jackie Horbrook. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me here.
So Jackie, how old are you, and what is your faith tradition?
Yeah, so I'm 33 years old, and my faith tradition is in Christianity.
How long have you practiced Christianity?
My entire life. I'm a PK, and so I was kind of raised and brought up in it my entire life, yeah.
We're unpacking a lot of things tonight about millennials right in your age group that are not necessarily sticking with those faith traditions that they may have been raised with. What are you hoping comes of this conversation? What have you found eye-opening, if anything, tonight so far?
I love the fact that we have so many commonalities rather than differences, even amongst the varying sections of religion. We still have a lot of things that we're rooting for, which is us to be rooted in faith in God, and the fact that we still are able to come together to have these conversations. I'm happy about that, and I want to see more of this happening, not just on today, but in real conversations throughout the world as we sit through coffee and we have conversations as we're in the airports. I think this needs to be ongoing.
Why is that so important?
Because it's going to be helpful for us to grow. We can't really grow if we don't have conversations with people, and I believe that's what this is about.
How do we continue this conversation after tonight? You said it's very important to keep this conversation going. Do you strike up a conversation with a friend, with a stranger? How are you going to move about your day-to-day life after hearing what happened tonight?
Yeah, so I think we do it through using our own personal, professional work backgrounds. A lot of us are in industries where we communicate with people who do different faith backgrounds all the time. How about having conversations where we're really able to find out more about the person? And once we begin to do that, I think we can have the difficult conversations about faith. So I think it first takes us listening to each other and starting to learn more about who you are as a person. And then after that, you can learn a little bit more about what they believe.
It sounds like you've been having these conversations for a while. Anything so far been a little surprising to you in how Black millennials are tying or not are leaving tradition, or in how they are just kind of interacting with faith traditions?
Yeah, I think it's not surprising that we interact differently. We've already been a different generation with online settings and different things, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I just think it needs to be an adaptation to what is changing within our generation and the church or our religious faith. We have to be able to adapt to what's happening, which means that we have to look at what they want. We have to ask questions about what they really like, and then take that and incorporate it into how we interact with our faith.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, Jackie?
Yeah, I think for me, I think as our generation, millennials, we really have to start incorporating the change into our lives. I created a space called Black Christian Influencers, where I really incorporate influencers from all different professional backgrounds to come together and talk, and hopefully we can keep that going.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, you are watching God Talk. We want you to be a part of the conversation. Use the hashtag God Talk, the hashtag Black Faith, and the hashtag, or at the museum, at NMAAHC. Now, we just heard from our panelists a part of Faith in Context. Our next panel is Faith in Community. And with this panel, we are going to explore how millennials practice faith through activism, community work, and the arts. Now, some of our panelists in the last panel, in that Faith in Context panel, they talked about it a little, but again, we are going to explore how Black millennials, how folks of these younger generations are using their faith to explore the faith in activism, community work, and the arts. We've heard from a lot of folks. At some point, we're going to hear again from Teddy Reeves, who is a curator for the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. Teddy?
Elise, thank you so much. This is, man, I'm just so excited for this next panel. This has been a great conversation. Audience, has it been great so far? Yeah. Oh, now, we're going to do that again. Audience, has it been great so far? Yeah. All right, our at-home audience, I hope you're still watching us. Again, to follow the conversation, use the hashtag GodTalk, use the hashtag Black Faith, and at the museum at NMAAHC, I just destroyed that, NMAAHC, follow along at the museum so that we can get your comments and you can really be a part of the conversation. I'm ready to jump into this faith and community conversation, so I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. Our first panelist, Dr. Kamasi Hill, is a historian, theologian, educator, art curator, filmmaker, and life member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He currently teaches history at Evanstown Township High School and is currently touring the country screening his feature-length film, Born in the Struggle. Please welcome Dr. Kamasi Hill. Our next panelist, Daniel X, is a follower and student of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He has been a part of the student ministry class of the Nation of Islam for 7 years. He is the owner of Lions Paul Karate and Chess Academy. Please welcome Daniel X. Our next panelist, Kiki Bryant, is the co-founder and co-host of Uppity Negress podcast. Kiki is passionate about issues related to Black women's mental, physical, and emotional health, and how they are facilitated by systematic violence. Please welcome Kiki Bryant. Please welcome Pastor Demetrius Davis. He serves as the lead pastor of City Point Community Church in Chicago, a graduate of Northeastern Illinois University, and a Master's of Divinity student at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary. He brings to City Point the gift of innovation and an uncanny ability to connect millennials to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Please welcome Pastor Demetrius Davis. Our next panelist is Lauren Ash. Lauren is a wellness visionary, yoga and meditation guide, engaging speaker and creative writer, and founder and executive director of the cultural shifting lifestyle brand synonymous with Black women's wellness, Black Girl in Om. Please welcome Lauren Ash. And our final panelist for the evening, Sir William James the Baptist. Sir William James the Baptist is the second-generation chaplain of the Modern Believers culture. An internationally known artist and spiritualist, Sir has performed on tours all across the globe, opening for the likes of Beyonce, Lauryn Hill, Alicia Keys, Mary J. Blige, and many, many more. Please give it up for Sir William James the Baptist. All right, so let's jump right in. You know, that first panel went by so fast, you know? So we got to jump right in, too. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, and I'm not going to say the title, Kamasi, but Kamasi is our village elder for the sake of this conversation. He is Gen X. So we like to invite a Gen X member to the panel as a group of millennials to make it a more intergenerational conversation. So we're grateful to have you, Kamasi, as well.
Thank you.
I want to pose this first question. To what degree is the narrative associated with the decline of religion amongst African Americans tied to a European notion of religion? As Black people are known to be incurably religious, how do we move from a Christocentric view of religion? It's a mouthful. Let me know if I need to repeat.
Okay, so I'll go first. I am the token atheist on the panel. For me, I think that the question of removing Christ from the question of religion only applies if you have a religion that doesn't center Christ. So if you are a Christian, that's kind of impossible. For me, I grew up very, very religious. My family literally owns a church. It is on 85th and Racine, every Sunday going to church services. And for me, my journey to atheism started by reading the Bible. When I was bored at home, I would read the Bible. And as I would read the Bible, I would go back to things I had read, and I would go to, the people in my family that were supposed to be the expert on these things and say, hey, this thing and that thing, they're in the same book. This is supposed to be an omnipotent God who told these people to write this stuff, and they directly contradict each other. What is that about? And I was met with shaming, told to be quiet, not to question. God works in mysterious ways. Sometimes those mysterious ways are directly contradicting. And so my journey kind of took me through, okay, why can't we question? Why can't we, explore the ideas that are in this book that you said is supposed to have all of the answers? Where do we seek the answers if they're not in here or if they're conflicting? And going through that journey led me to, okay, what's the history of this book? Who wrote it? Why did they write it this way? And through that journey, I came to the conclusion that, maybe it's not that God created man, because everything that I've seen across culture suggests to me that man created God, and not vice versa. And that's why each culture has its own God. And so the journey from me, from being an incredibly religious kid to somebody who is now atheist, 100% came from me asking those questions about who gave us this God. Me specifically being Christian, growing up, that is a religion that was forced upon us by our enslavers. And those enslavers were European. And so a large percentage of my decision to step away from Christianity had 100% to do with that. And the people who wrote the book on this religion are in direct contradiction to, or direct opposition to, is a better term, my personhood. And there was no way for me to reconcile that. And that was my choice to step away from Christianity. And as I started to kind of evaluate other religions, other belief systems, I kept finding these common threads with Christianity that I couldn't shake. And that is how I made my personal decision to step away from religion altogether. The one form of religion that I do think that personally has value in terms of a cultural perspective is traditional African spirituality, because that's not something that is Eurocentric, it's African spirituality. And so, yeah.
I can jump in. So I've spent a lot of time growing up in the church. I think one of the things that I struggled with was the historical facts. I struggled with understanding God next to science. And after studying people like Ravi Zacharias and other people like other apologists, I realized that in order to understand this book, it has to be put into a cultural view. And so I travel in order to understand those views. And partnering in art with other artists, you start to find their pieces that they're finding. And that's really going to be essential to how we move forward in our belief systems, period. Because we really need curious minds again, So when it comes down to that Eurocentric mentality, you still have to go back to Africa. No matter how much you get the modern pastor, you still have to study Nat Turner. No matter how much you love Israel, you still have to look at Egypt, where Jesus spent most of his time from a baby to 12. So he has an African perspective. So it's just about the gems that, for me, has been finding those gems in the book that no one is really ready to be curious about in our culture, because as Black spiritual people, we would like to put our responsibility on someone else to study and present a sermon, when in reality, we're always living our sermon.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the image of a circle just keeps coming to mind to me, how our people always gather in circles. And I think about this because with my work, I've, for almost 5 years now, curated space for particularly Black women to come together and to have conversations and to move and to breathe in ways that are rooted in our healing. And that's essentially spirituality. Oftentimes these gatherings occur on Sundays at 11 o'clock.
That's cool.
And, seeing the number of people that come and for them embracing it as a new form of church. And I wouldn't say that all of those people would say that church is irrelevant. Some people might, but not all of them. And then seeing a small percentage of people who would reach out and say, I would love to come, but this happens during church. But again, like in these gatherings, we always have a moment where we circle up. And I mentioned this, and I think this is coming up because when I think about Eurocentric ways of being and doing, from what my experience has been is it's very top down, because it's so tied up with patriarchy as well, like Eurocentric and patriarchy is all connected. It's very top down, and it's very like I am receiving something from you, you have the knowledge, I'm getting it. But within my practice, it's always a circle. We're all connected. We're all affirming that there is value in the wisdom that we all inherently carry that is connected to this divine wisdom, but it's also very intimately woven into our very beings as well. So I think that, again, seeing such a pull and an energy around the kind of space that I hold in collaboration with many amazing people on my team and many amazing also spiritual leaders within my community, it's because we're like looking at each other and we're like affirming that there is a value in something that we all have to offer and that there is a healing in that as well.
Good. That's it. All right. Anyone else? Now I have some more questions so you don't have to worry about it. You ready? All right. What is the consistent message you are hearing from people on the ground regarding the presence of faith leaders in the communities? Do these reports portray, in your estimation, an accurate, robust, and complex portrait of these leaders and communities? What are people saying on the front lines? What are people saying in the streets of Chicago? What are people saying about faith leaders? And we have a faith leader here. What are people saying, and more so millennials saying about faith leaders?
So there is a big rift in Chicago between the activist community and faith leader community, specifically Christian pastors. There is a tradition of grandstanding among Christian pastors in Chicago, black Christian pastors, rushing to get in front of microphones and news cameras and things like that, sometimes co-opting movements and marches that people have put in a lot of hard work to organize. And there's also this voice that says the church isn't doing anything about injustice, and I see it. I see a lot of churches that do absolutely nothing. They're pretty much they're pretty insular. On the other hand, I do see the pastor that doesn't even make the salary of a first-year school teacher, that does his work faithfully, and he is the place that people in the community can come to get some of the social service help, so the help with their gas bills to keep their gas from getting shut off in the wintertime, that set up food pantries. And these are the unsung guys. Nobody's going to ever hear about them because they pastor 75 people. They're never going to be on TV, but they're out there doing the work. What I also see among like peers of mine that are pastoring churches is they're kind of overwhelmed with just maintaining what they have in-house, right? So they're trying, when they became the pastor, they also became like the caretaker of a 100-year-old building that hasn't been well taken care of. So some of the main issues that they're dealing with is like the plaster is falling off the east wall of the church. The stairs need to be repaired. We can't afford a janitor. I might have to go and clean up pee from around the toilet. Like they have, like just the work that they have to do with just trying to sustain just this week-to-week thing that's happening can be pretty overwhelming, and they don't have the training or capacity to become frontline activists. So I hear both sides.
Anyone else?
Well, I think that the grassroots approach is that the church is
or the institutions in general are no longer relevant, but I think it has a direct consequence of churches being ran like big business for over a decade. And what happened was our current generation, the millennial generation, we were too young to be able to contribute financially in our young adult years, in college, in our high school years. So when we came to the institutions, I was formerly in the church, but when we went to those institutions and had our questions and needed some type of assistance, because we weren't putting anything in the collection plate, they were put on the back burner. So now we have a generation of millennials who are now coming of age, right? And we're starting families and we're having careers now. So because of those things, now this conversation is relevant because we can actually take over for the elders who are making their way into retirement and things like that. So going back to the original question, I believe, I lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
What are people saying on the ground?
Yes. So as members of the Nation of Islam, we're always in the community. And one of the things that we have a responsibility to do as what we call FOI, or the men in the Nation of Islam, is that on a weekly basis, we should be engaging with our people. And when we do that, it's always the same response. The church does nothing for us. They never come out to see us whenever we have to stand up for something. And we saw this, a beautiful incident of this was in Ferguson, when some of the elders that were formerly of respect had came out to Ferguson to try to do the taking of the podium and rostrum. And some of those young brothers from that climate was like, nah, you got to go. And if you really get the inside scoops and read some of these books that were written about it, they were really almost violent to the point of, you all are no longer meeting the needs of our people and servicing our needs. So there's no point or no resting place for this generation to be partners in anything with you all.
I think it divided during Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. The black community divided between intellectuals and spirituals. And since then, we haven't really been on the path to reconcile, sort of, build that family again between our community of faith believers. I hear the cultural, artistic stuff, right? So I hear the music isn't the same, which to me, studying music very closely to the culture, I understand that it's really important to us, Negro spirituals and all of that sort of stuff, and moving away from that and becoming more of a whitewashed sound for gospel music, which is the believer's artistic music form. That's our outlet. So for the music, it's been, I don't like the music. Two, if it is gospel or it is African-American, black-driven, cultured music, it doesn't make sense. It's not connecting to it. It's not telling the same story. The music, the movies, all of the things that bring impact. And Miles Monroe said, hey, before anything, to build a kingdom, you need impact. So in order to build that, I think in influence, we've really lost that artistically. We've lost that as activists. We've lost that as businessmen, community-driven leaders. They're still questioning King's work. You can have street names after you in every city, but we still didn't get what exactly he wanted, which was reparations, which was land, so give us the name, but hide the ownership. So the younger ones now, they're seeing through that. They're saying, hey, listen, you don't have an economic structure, you don't have a community, thing to change this. You just want to jump in front of a mic and tell people that we're hurting, which they already know.
For me specifically, I am a podcaster and I attend a community of about 35,000 of our followers. And because we are a-religious, most of our followers are a-religious. And the general thing that they say to me is they don't think that religious leaders should have much of a place in political issues, and here's why. Just because you're an expert as a religious authority does not mean that you know what to say, what to do, or how to solve all social problems. And speaking specifically in a Chicago context, a lot of the pastors here are very, very corrupt. Just as a
I agree.
Story time.
I agree, 1,000%.
Story time. When I was about 13 years old, I was dragged to a church after church I was dragged to a church after church by some family members, and this entire service served as a promotion platform for Rod Blagojevich, who, as you all know, was notoriously corrupt. But that's what a lot of the political leaders do here in Chicago. They know that they have a tied-in community, that they know that they're going to fill the pews, and what they do is they sell out. They're basically political influencers in the way of social media influencers. They get these people in there, they pay a little back end, they get their tax break for it, and then they tell the people, like, this is who you're going to vote for. And that's how we ended up with Ronner.
I 100% agree with her. I 100% agree with you. My dad has a church, and they've come to every church, every after service, at home, and some of it is for it not necessarily giving you a tax break or this and that, or maybe negotiating a grant. To where it looks like it's for African American people, when in reality it's for that leader to have a new car. I've sat in those back rooms, and my dad, second generation pastor, I know those handshakes.
Unfortunately, the story is a reoccurring trope within the context of African American religious institutions. Henry Ford Sr. was notorious for going to black churches in the 1920s in Detroit and paying off black pastors to convince their members not to join unions. So this is an old trope, where folks go to black churches and essentially, use a form of co-optation and payola to pay off pastors. And that does happen. But I also want to echo what Pastor said here, and that is we have to remember that the vast majority of Protestant churches are 200 members or less. We have to remember that the vast majority of pastors are not megachurch pastors. We have to remember that in the varying faith communities that we have, a lot of the commitments that the leadership have is primarily to maintain the institution. So a lot of times what happens is the administrative work that takes place in this church, in these churches and faith communities, trump the spiritual needs of people. And I think that's what you see among millennials is a distrust of institutional life, period, across the board. And so one of the things that I see, because I'm not a millennial, I am the village elder. One of the things that I see amongst millennials is that there is a lack of trust amongst institutions, period. So it's the church is just one, faith communities are just one expression of these long-standing conservative institutions that have been mainstays in our community, that they may have some form of cultural or spiritual or communal connections to, but don't really find their identities being affirmed in these places. And so the church leaders are simply larger extensions and representatives of the institution, right? So I think where I feel where millennials can teach us as Generation Xers, as boomers, and as the younger generations, I think what millennials are really teaching us is to question always.
Absolutely.
And to question to the point of not for questioning's sake, but to question to the point of having our faith leaders realize that, rhetoric and maintaining institutions is not going to cut it. We got to move, we got to produce, we have to build, and more importantly, we have to affirm the identities and spaces that millennials find themselves in and trafficking in. Yeah.
This is good. This is good. So it was you're on it, so I'm going to go ahead and go there. And you talked about politics. We are heading into an election year. How does your religious or spiritual beliefs impact your political activism? Is a candidate's religious affiliation as important to you as it was for previous generations? If so, why? If not, why not?
I don't care. I'm more concerned with age of candidates. As a millennial, I'm concerned with age of some of our candidates that are running in the Democratic primary right now than I am of religious affiliation. So that's one for me. How my faith informs my politics, it does, but only to some degree, because there are certain things that I believe as a Christian or just certain preferences that I have that don't necessarily align with the political party that I align myself with. So there are things that I think are of utmost importance to me, like equity and bridging gender pay gaps and maintaining or creating a decent healthcare system so that like my mom doesn't have to like continue to work just because of the insurance. Those are more so the things that I'm concerned about. As a faith leader, how will millennials be able to support faith institutions that they do believe in as long as they're saddled with student loan debt? So those are some important things for me, like for a candidate to talk about.
Reverend, you walked heavy with that student loan debt, didn't you?
My generation, in many respects, is caught up in things like electability. Many black Gen Xers are very clear that they don't want Trump, but there's this schism as to who they want within the Democratic Party, and there's an internal conversation of, well, anybody is better than Trump, but the most important thing is we have to make sure that folks are electable. What I would like to hear from millennials on this panel and in a larger, conversation is to really push us to move away from electability, to move away from narrow conversations about religious affiliation, and to really push older generations and the candidates to, develop platforms that are going to reimagine the American body politic. Because one of the things, we have a podcaster. I was talking to another millennial last week, and he was lamenting the fact that older generation Black Talk Radio was more progressive. And I had to challenge him. I said, when I was growing up, there were a few folks on public radio, there were a few folks on talk radio. I remember Radioscope, for those of you who are my age, that was an entertainment program. But when I listen to podcasts, I hear LGBTQ voices, I hear Black feminist voices, I hear atheist voices, I hear agnostic voices, I hear Christian voices, I hear Muslim, I hear a variety of millennial perspectives. And so what I would like to hear from millennials is in the spaces that they flow and traffic from is to push us to reimagine the way we can do things. So, pushing us to have, and pushing us as in us, the older generation, also the politicians, to think about what it means to not simply talk about mass incarceration, but to talk about prison abolishment. But what it means not to simply talk about police reform, but what it means about community policing and moving away from draconian laws and police. That's what I would like to hear millennials push us. I think one of the great things about millennials is because they have such a pulse and access to technology in really creative ways, and they don't have allegiances to traditional ways of doing things, they can really push us in some very creative ways, and I want to hear more of that.
I would like to jump in right there. I agree, reimagining what it looks like politically, tying religion and politics. After much study, I've realized that Protestant protesting the Catholic Church, we got this model of the church from the Catholic Church. With that being said, we have to look at the type of families, banking families, and the economic structure that was set up there with the Catholic Church. You have the Medici family and all of those who had banking, commerce, art, all of that, and even affected politics. So that's why I'm going to the Vatican in like a few days, maybe a week or so, to study the infrastructure to understand how to do it differently. Now, how do I apply that to politics? Well, politics, do I think about the next 4 or 8 years, or do I think about reimagining what we look like politically? We could call out a billion things we could be an activist for, right? But to build the infrastructure is going to come with some responsibility, which I feel like most of our pioneering figures haven't taken the responsibility and put their money where their mouth is. So they haven't set up the infrastructure for us to have our own Vatican City. See, the problem is we're getting killed because we don't own that block. The problem is we're getting killed because that's not our cop. The problem is we're having a tough time with lights and whatever because we're not pushing innovation to bridge lights. So what we're doing with my team at Temple, we're building what we believe is the next political structure, everything. We want our own city. We don't want, no questions. So politics right now, yeah, I look at how that aligns to my 50-year or life goal, but ultimately, I would love for us to come together enough to where we can have our own city and then structure it based on what everybody deserves. That's what we really deserve as African American people, but our leading figures has always been pastors. They've been more pastors than they've been great entrepreneurs and community leaders. So in order to change that, we have to go in and not ask anybody for anything, go and buy up everything. In order to do that, we have to sort of fix our economic structure or our infrastructure. For example, I was at Jamal Bryant's church a couple of weeks ago, and I told them they should change tithe into stock. Because my mom has poured all her money in the church, and today she can't give me anything. Now, God is blessed where I can give her the world and show her the world, but we've lost our inheritance because we've given it all into a church. So in order to fix the political structure, I feel like the church being the lead since Nat Turner and before then, what we have to do as preachers and believers is start a believer's economy, which is going to look like Black Wall Street. It's going to look like why Bronzeville is Bronzeville instead of Douglasville, which was what it was before. The migration has to happen. The exodus has to happen from, expecting help and getting our own help.
And I think just to kind of, we don't do pork in Islam, so horsey back off my brother over there. The minister said,
I see what you did. Yeah.
The minister said that politics without economics is symbol without substance. So until we get the economic situation correct, we shouldn't even be attached to the political landscape at this stage of our development. And one of the hypocritical things that I think we have to be careful of as millennials is we'll take a torch with fire and stones to the religious institutions, but then I'll see a hypocritical I'll see a hypocritical perspective when it comes to politics. So it's like, okay, you want to burn down the religious institutions, but you still want to play the political game that has done nothing for us since we've been in America.
Exactly.
We have to reanalyze that because this is really not a bad thing to have this conversation. This is actually the doing of God. Because if you look at the scriptures, God is always talking about building a new kingdom, a new world, the kingdom of God. Well, how is he going to build that if the same funky institutions are still in power today? He has to replace those things. So when we see this mass exodus of traditional religion, that's the doing of God. But we also have to take that same mentality and apply it to the political landscape because we're playing the same games, and most people that are mad at Trump want Hillary. That's crazy to me. That's hypocritical. We have to burn both institutions down to the ground and allow God to build something that's brand new.
Yeah, I wanted to offer that, to be completely honest, I'm increasingly disinterested in politics altogether. Even the mention of, next year being election year is so triggering to me, and I know that it is for many people, especially from marginalized backgrounds. For me, especially with the work that I do, I'm invested in how can we take care of ourselves, especially as communities of color, in the midst of all of this, because it's by design that it's triggering, and it's by design, you know, that we're increasingly disenfranchised in the system to be able to have a voice, so that it's like traumatic for so many of us in our families to even be able to vote still. So like last year, we had a whole conversation within my platform, Black Girl and Ohm, about what it means to be woke and well. You know, our community talks a lot about staying woke and being woke, and that is so important. Any like kind of debates that happen around like, well, you need to be invested in this way, or you need to be showing up in this way, or you need to vote for this person, or you need to think about this. I'm much more interested in just like, again, the circle's coming to mind, like how we can be invested in reimagining, in dismantling what needs to be reimagined and dismantled, and also how we can take care of ourselves while doing that, because so many of us are completely exhausted, overwhelmed, triggered and traumatized from the whole system and the every 4-year thing altogether.
Yeah. Are millennials leaving traditional Black religious spaces, or are these institutions leaving Black millennials?
That question makes me think that it's in the current, but I actually think it already happened.
Yeah.
This goes back to that original point that I made earlier about the whole, this generation was not able to tithe or contribute to the congregation, so we've been abandoned for several years. So I don't think it's a question that should be something that's current, it's already happened, and this is the repercussion of it. We're taught that for every physical reality, there's a spiritual reality. So if the physical reality is people are leaving traditional religion, then what was the spiritual reality?
Yeah.
Y'all been left us years ago, and now this is the direct consequence.
I think they left us. In a time when we should have been great stewards of our money, our community, like in Chicago, in Bronzeville, it was such a different atmosphere, you know, when Obama first won and all of that, and we were just so excited and everything, right? I saw him ride past and everything. It was like amazing. He voted and all, you know, right down the street. It was amazing. And then the pastors used that to boost egos and get into the White House, when they really should have reinvested into the community. And what does that look like? That's why I say they left us, is because their money went outside of the community. Every time I hang out with billionaire friends, they're investing in the next generation. And we haven't really invested in the next generation. We're still working off the first generation structure of church, which is an actual building. We haven't even got to digital yet. So we're still on the same infrastructure. This is insane. So that's why they left us, because the money went outside the community. It went to Gucci, not to mama's baby that's making a T-shirt or anything. That car, that went to Audi, when it should have went into the community to build up economics. So I think they left us as well.
I do see digital communities that offer a church-like space.
Yeah.
I see an emerging group of specifically women of color. I mean, that's also what I'm paying attention to, but who are talking about consciousness and God and spirit in ways that resonate and in ways that connect. And I attend a spiritual center. I recently relocated to LA, and I attend Agape, and when I was here in Chicago, I attended Bodhi, which I understand is going through its own reimagining process right now too. But I have brought a number of my friends to Agape since going there, and my mother, who's like, to me, a very conservative, like Black Christian woman. But the overwhelming response when bringing my people to this like unconventional, it's still brick and mortar, but this unconventional spiritual space where you can talk about God, someone might talk about Christ, but not in this way that is tied to traditional Christianity, and also has guest speakers that are representing different faith traditions and spiritual traditions. The overwhelming response is actually like this deep, like vulnerable, like kind of breaking open of like, wow, a spiritual community can be like this.
Yeah.
I've had friends cry at their response to the fact that the music is very reminiscent of like what they grew up with, but the message isn't like patronizing or repressive or condescending, you know? And literally last week I was with my mom, and my mom was like, oh, I was like, what church are you going to these days? And she tells me, and she's like complaining about it, and I'm just like, you know, like waiting for what she's gonna say next. And she's like, I was looking for a place like where you took me. And I was shocked because she is just, again, so traditional. But I think in general, not just millennials, but in general, folk are looking for something more, more open and more expansive, and that it is happening, I think, in the digital space. I see it, and also it's happening in brick and mortar spaces that are, you know, perhaps just beyond, more unique and more beyond a traditional sense of religion as well.
I'm gonna share just a quick story. So my granddad moved to Chicago when he was like a late teenager. Moved to Chicago from a little town in Mississippi, and he had less than an 8th grade education. So long story short, he hustled, he did all kinds of things, and ended up buying real estate, and he bought some land on the south side. It was like a couple acres, actually. And it was like being used as like a junkyard and some other stuff. Granddad passed away maybe about 5 years ago. And my aunt called me a year ago. She texted me and she said, you know, that land that your granddad had, we're about to lose it because we owe taxes. So if you know anybody that's willing to buy it, like we just want to sell it for the taxes. In hindsight, I wish I would have found the money to buy it. The CTA wants to expand the red line onto that property, and they want to buy that property. The reason I tell that story is because I fear that as millennials, like our talk about tearing down institutions that generations before us, like, they scrubbed other people's floors to build these places. You know, so, like, you go into some of these churches and these things seem outdated. They'll have like the brass placard on the pew, and it'll say Maddie Mae Stevenson or something like that. like it represents like some old lady, somebody's grandmama, somebody's great grandmama who scrubbed floors or did whatever to put her nickels, dimes, and quarters together to donate money to that church. Like, these places represent the best of Black autonomy that we have. And so the idea that they should just go by the way, I think is short-sighted and a little bit irresponsible. Yes, it is the site of trauma. It is the place that people have been preyed upon, but it is also the place that dispatches deacons to go see some of our grandmothers in the nursing home that we haven't been to see in months. It is still that place. It is that place that gasses up that broken down church van on Sunday morning, and they go and they pick up old people, and for some of them, it is their only trip outside of the house that week is to go to that place. So in the same way that I wish we had did something to maintain that land that my grandfather had the foresight, but maybe not fully the tools to know what to do with, I wish we in the same way would view the church as that place that maybe our elders didn't quite do it right, didn't quite shape it the way that it should be, but they did leave us something. They left us some infrastructure, and something has to be done with these buildings. Something has to be done with these institutions. And I think it is much easier for us to fix. This is me talking as a 12-year church planner. Easier for us to fix than to totally rebuild from the ground up.
I do want to say this, and I think it's important to really name this as a reality. Yeah, I don't really attend church anymore, but I'm a pretty much lifelong member of the AME Church. And I'm sure other traditional mainline black churches have experienced this too, and that is reporting false numbers. The black church has great PR. So when you ask the question, have millennials left or has the church left, have black faith communities left, it's not even really about the physical bodies in those spaces. It is what are black millennials getting from those spaces, right? So even if they're physically there, if you're not getting anything, if there isn't any investment in your identity and your value and your personhood, what's the point? And so when you talk about the systems of the institutions that provided historically systems of caring and nurturing that need to be present, I agree. However, some of those institutions need to die. And then some of them need to consolidate. And that is one of the real issues that the black church in particular is going to have to confront. Yeah. They're going to have to ask themselves the question, should we keep these 12 churches with these 5 family members in these 12 churches, maintain these old buildings, or should we just combine into one, sell the land, and then we can reimagine and recreate systems and institutions and ministries of caring and nurturing for the communities. So I think that is the type of direction I think we need to be going towards. But I also think we need to be honest. When you said some of these places are sites of trauma, we have to be honest about that. We have to name that for some folk, those buildings represent a whole lot. Bishop Noel Jones, famous pastor in Los Angeles. For those of you who don't know, his sister is Grace Jones. That Grace Jones. I remember hearing him preach a sermon. And at the end of the sermon, he talked about his sister Grace, who, as you know, does not traffic at all in black church culture, any of her popular culture career. He had a conversation with her. And she said to him, "You are always talking about how the church helps folks, but you never tell my story about how the church hurt folks like me. And I never ever want to go back to that place that hurt me." So we have to be honest and we have to name the real life trauma that people have experienced in these institutions, which have made spaces toxic for people. So yes, while I agree we need to have institutional reform in our communities where we can reimagine ways to take care, especially of the folk who paved the way, we also have to get rid of some of those institutions that need to die.
So I would like to put the two together, right? So I own a company called Temple, and we're focused on believers, period, all over the world. And we're a digital app, we're a website, all of that sort of stuff. So there is a future in it. And I want to contribute to what you're doing as well digitally. I think that's amazing. And hold me to that, you know what I mean? As well, for you, I have a father who was born in 1924 who migrated during the Great Migration to Bronzeville during the time when Louis Armstrong, Nat King Cole, and all of them got it. But he didn't do well with the infrastructure. Now, it is an emotional thing, and it reminds me, and it's my dad. He stayed in there sometimes for years, so it's that emotional thing. I had a cousin the other day come in while I was in Mississippi. She said, "I just wanted a hug, that's why I went to church." I feel like some of the trauma we have in our community, we have to stop expecting the church to deliver what we need. And that's a marketing ploy for the church to pull us in off of emotions. Yeah. They have to be good stewards of their work and good stewards of the community. And by doing that, you invest into your church, and your church will keep the church going, and it will constantly grow. But we're not doing that. So the problem is, I agree with you, brother. One, reimagining what it looks like, right? But then some of them's got to go, And I talked to Pastor John Gray. I said the margin between, the wage margin in your church is why they're mad at you about the Lamborghini. Because they're not making $40,000. Help your whole crowd become billionaires, then you're good. So I do want to keep it, and you would be able to keep it if they had set up an infrastructural, financial way for you to do it at 13, because your mom would have done it. You know what I mean? Like, so it's same with my mom. You know, they were like, we got to get rid of the church, and they're moving us out and all of that, and that political handshake that they did didn't work, so they're kicking us out anyway. I couldn't help them because I was too young, like he said. So I do love the idea of the church, but I also feel like we have to grow into what she's doing, because that's how we're really going to reach the masses. I'm asking them to change tithe into stock because the wealth of the wicked is laid up for the... But we're steady grabbing money from our people. Why won't we go? I don't get money from the church. I go do a Lexus deal and say, hey, there's a lot of believers that can drive a Lexus. Now I need you to help fund this idea we're working on. I sit down with John Zimmer, the CEO of Lyft, and I say, hey, how can we do something differently? Because my believers, we're going to move differently. We want to move with power, and we want the money. And that's what King said. We're going to get our check. His words, right?
We're going to get that check. So one more question before we go to questions from our audience and our social audience. What role does sensuality, sexuality, intimacy, or embodiment play in your understanding of God, the divine, or sacred?
I was hoping you would ask this question.
That's such a lit question. That's a lit question.
I've been like more open lately, using my platform to talk about just an intentional journey that I've been around, like intimacy and pleasure. And I believe that like our capacity as humans, our capacity inherently to be able to experience pleasure and full embodiment. And when I say that, and I talked about that earlier this week too, is that especially, again, I can speak as myself, especially as a Black woman, we are literally conditioned and socialized to be a sliver of our fullest selves in our bodies. So the question that was posed at the earlier panel about like, is the Black church safe? I literally thought about a recent memory that I had, literally being at church, minding my own business after getting prayed on. And this Black elder like walks past me and he's like, and I was like staring, looking at my friend, and he was like, you better not smile like that. Like there's a lot of single men around here. And I was like, what? This is literally like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I digress. For me to have experiences like that within a space that is supposed to be safe is something that, you know, is oftentimes causing me to, again, be but a sliver of the fullest self that I can be. So when I remember intentionally through movement, through dance, through sex, through self-pleasure, through eating the food that I want to eat, through dancing my body, through all of these amazing ways that the divine has given me the gift to feel, that is such an amazing testament to the fact that I was created. You know, it's like, I am here and I am meant to be here on purpose in the fullest expression of myself. So for us to be able to remember as Black people that that is a gift, and that is a gift that we have a right to be able to tap into, even with the trauma, even with external repression, like that we are constantly facing. That is just so amazing. So thank you for this question. I didn't think you were gonna get to it.
No problem.
So,
anyone else?
For me, I think that one of my largest sort of driving issues with religion, just Abrahamic religions specifically, is that we do a lot of talk on how to make religion less sexist. There's not a lot of talk on the fact that the scriptures themselves are inherently sexist. There are so many scriptures devoted specifically to how women are supposed to look, think, dress, and act, and not very much, you know, like a sliver in comparison for men. And so for me, there was no real way for me to be a devout Christian woman and be my fullest self. And that was a large driving factor in my decision to exit from the institution of Abrahamic religion altogether.
I recently saw the documentary film about Aretha Franklin, Amazing Grace, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to watch it. She performs in a church in Los Angeles in the 1970s. And when you said sensuality and sexuality and black bodies, my mind immediately went there. Because the truth of specifically the Black Protestant church is that it has always been a queer space. It has been a performative space where queer folk have had that kind of dual consciousness. Like in one way, they're very restricted from their full humanity, but at the same time, they're performing in ways that have transformed the church and have transformed popular culture in the world.
I love it.
But I also have to say, when I'm thinking of that documentary, I'm not only thinking of the queer folk that I saw in that documentary, I'm also thinking about the black women, and I'm thinking about Aretha Franklin, and I'm thinking about ecstasy. I'm thinking about sensuality. I'm thinking about bodies. I'm thinking about sweat. Like, I'm thinking about all of those. There's a very precious moment in the film where she's singing and her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, comes over while she's singing and just wipes the sweat from her brow. The engagement of human bodies and intimacy between a father and a daughter in that special way. Queer folk and black women who dominate black church spaces have taught us in very implicit and explicit ways to honor our bodies and to have a theology of pleasure. And I think that, to me, I have to shout out the Twitter space. We have a mutual friend, Candace, and I don't know her Twitter handle, but I encourage you to follow her because she's really doing some very fascinating things about helping black women, and particularly black church women, understand that their bodies are a site of pleasure and it's not in conflict with their Christian religious practice. So I think for me, if we want to big up the black church in any way, in terms of honoring our sensuality, our sexuality, and our bodies, then we gotta honor the queer folk and the black women who gave us that gift.
So thank you. For the sake of time, I'm gonna have to turn it over to my friend Elise, who has questions from the audience and from our digital platform. Elise?
Thanks, Teddy. Well, we have several questions here. Our first one is coming from an audience member here in Chicago. Considering some religious and social leaders have a history of harassment and bullying, how can millennials find positive role models in and outside of religion?
Well, for me, there aren't a lot of voices out there like mine. I am a queer, atheist, black woman. We are the most religious folks on earth, literally and actually. And so, in going into spaces and seeking out voices like mine, I didn't find them. And so, I became one. And we are in a time now more than ever where that's possible. If the voice that you are looking for does not exist, be it.
I think for me, I chose some of the great leaders that I saw changing the culture. So for me, I saw Jay-Z and I was like, look what he's doing. We all changed from jerseys to button-ups just because Jay-Z said so. I got to meet this guy. I did enough networking to where I got a chance to meet him, and then he gave me opportunities, and we talked about the Bible. I went on tour with Nelly, who is the opposite of, you would think the opposite of spirituality, but we spent the whole time on tour talking about the Bible and breaking it down, but also understanding the way he go about building in whatever way they can. So that's what I did. I just went outside of the scope. I said, okay, the church don't have what I need. I'll go get it from Jay-Z. I'll go get it from, anyone that I can get it from, and then bring it back home. So I've literally only done deals in order to get understanding so I can bring it back home. So I say to that person, hey, go get someone that might be outside of your religion, might not be even, or have a religious public figure, but they have exactly what you need to fix your community.
On that note too, for me at least, this question and then your response prompted something that was a part of my journey, and that I think many Black folk within the church struggle with, is when the very real part in your spiritual path that hopefully everyone experiences, which is questioning it in a healthy way, the potential fear that brings up for you, because so many of us are socialized to only look within the church structure for XYZ. And we are also socialized that like it is a fearful thing to not associate yourself with that because of hell and all the things. So like for me, I realized a few years ago in a conversation with a really dear friend who asked me, like, do you even associate with Christianity anymore? Like, what is your like title? And I was like, no. And for the first time, that answer like brings me joy rather than fear. And that was like such a mark of where I am in my relationship to God. And it was really beautiful. So I just affirm that for anyone who is looking for leaders or looking for community and it's outside of the church and that brings about some anxiety, like acknowledge that and own that and be okay with finding community outside of that, and that's okay.
And I will say that there is a institution that embodies that in the Nation of Islam. That's one of the reasons I love being a member, is because that's one of the few places that you can find an elder. The Minister Farrakhan now is 86 years old. But from 86 all the way down to the youngest in the Nation of Islam, we still have that relationship between the elders and the youth. And a lot of the issues that we're laying out in this conversation today, it shows that there's a disconnect between the two classes. There's an older generation, there's a younger generation, and they're on two totally different pages. But in the Nation of Islam, it's like, how are they syncing this? And that's because the elders are fulfilling scripture when it says, old men for counsel and young men for war. We've separated where we no longer have counsel, so you have a bunch of war-hungry young people that don't have any direction, and we're tearing down things that are actually to our benefit. And then you have an older generation that is full of wisdom, but out of jealousy or envy or whatever the case is, they have a bunch of young people that can get things done, but they don't feed into them or fill them with what they need to be successful.
So for the sake of time, and I know we could keep going, we are out of time. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? The time goes by extremely fast. I want to thank the Lilly Endowment, who makes this possible, who made the Center for the Study of African American Religious Life at the National Museum of African American History and Culture possible. I would like to thank my colleagues at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Pew Research Center, the Harold Washington Cultural Center, all of our panelists, our audience here in Chicago, our virtual audience. Thank you so much for tuning into this conversation. Again, remember to keep the conversation going on social media using the hashtag GodTalk, hashtag Black Faith. Our next conversation, our next God Talk will be in Baltimore. So look out for that information. We're really excited for that as well. To close us out this evening, I'm going to turn it back to my good friend, Elise Preston.
All right, thanks, Teddy, and thanks everyone for joining us for God Talk here in the audience and online. As Teddy mentioned, we want to keep this conversation going, so use those hashtags, God Talk, hashtag Black Faith, and at the museum at NMAAHC. Again, join us on social media, and as always, you can download the app for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It's available in Google Play and on the App Store. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, we'll see you in Baltimore.